Picture yourself below the deck of a Roman warship, perhaps a trireme or a quinquereme, the pride of the Republic and later the Empire. The ceiling above you is low enough that you cannot stand straight. The air is thick, a mingling of wood, pitch, damp cloth, and human breath. Somewhere, faintly, comes the slow, rhythmic slap of waves against the hull. You are seated on a long bench. It is polished in places from years of use, and rough in others, where the grain has split. Beside you, shoulder to shoulder, are other men, citizens, freedmen, and sometimes even slaves, pressed together in the tight confines of the rowing deck. There is little conversation, only the occasional whisper, the shift of a foot, the creak of the oarlock. Your hands curl around the worn wood of the oar. It is heavier than you expect. When the order comes from above, a sharp voice carrying through the openings in the deck, you lean forward, dip the blade into the water, and pull. The movement is steady, practiced, but each repetition weighs on your muscles. Pull and return, pull and return. Over and over, the rhythm becomes almost hypnotic. The light here is dim, filtering through small gaps above, pale and shifting with the movement of the sea. The heat builds quickly. You can hear the timbers flex slightly with each wave, a sound like a slow groan deep in the bones of the ship. Every so often, droplets of brine fall from above, leaving tiny cool marks on your arms or neck before they vanish into the heat again. The rations are simple. A small piece of coarse bread, perhaps some dried figs, and water stored in skins or amphorae. On longer voyages, the bread hardens until it must be soaked before eating. You chew slowly, not for enjoyment, but because it fills the time between shifts at the oar. There is little variety, and the taste of salt never truly leaves your mouth. When the wind is with you, the sails may take the strain, and you can rest. But on calm days, or in tight maneuvers, it is the rowers who move the ship. Your back aches, your hands blister, and the steady sway of the sea never stops. Sleep comes in short bursts, curled in your place on the bench, or lying against the hull, the wood warm from the sun above. There are sounds that become part of you, the slap of waves, the slow creak of oars in their locks, the faint thud of footsteps on the deck overhead, the call of the helmsman or the commander, firm, measured, rarely raised in anger, but always enough to stir the entire deck into motion. On some days, the ship will dock, and you will walk briefly on solid ground, but the smell of tar and salt lingers, and the rhythm of rowing stays in your muscles. Life is measured in strokes of the oar, in meals, in watches, and in the changing color of the sea as the sun moves overhead. And always, there is the knowledge that you are one part of a vast machine, the Navy of Rome, built not just on wood and sails, but on the countless hours of men like you, unseen and uncelebrated beneath the deck. In this dim, enclosed space, time slows, days stretch into weeks, voyages into seasons. The world is reduced to the oar in your hands, the bench beneath you, and the soft but constant voice of the sea. Let us now step away from the oar bench and climb, slowly, into the sunlight above. Here, on the deck, the sea stretches out in every direction, a shimmering expanse of blue and silver. And at the helm of Rome's naval ambitions, in both war and peace, stood a man whose name is woven deeply into the fabric of the empire. Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa was not born into the ancient, patrician families of Rome. His beginnings were modest compared to many of his peers. A provincial upbringing, far from the marble halls and gilded dining rooms of the capital. Yet, in the Rome of the late Republic, skill and loyalty could raise a man higher than birth alone. He became known first as a soldier, then as a trusted friend and ally of Gaius Octavius, the man who would become Augustus, Rome's first emperor. Their bond was more than political convenience. It was forged in the shared hardships of youth, in the military camps and long marches of Rome's turbulent years of civil war. Agrippa's rise was marked by practical brilliance. He was not a man who sought glory in dramatic speeches or theatrical gestures. Instead, he worked quietly and effectively, turning strategy into victory. In 36 BCE, during the campaign against Sextus Pompey, a man who had turned the seas into his personal stronghold, Agrippa took command of Rome's fleet. Imagine the tension of those days. The docks of Sicily busy with preparation, the hammering of carpenters, the weaving of sails, the smell of fresh tar. Agrippa oversaw the construction of a new kind of harbor at Portus Julius, a vast naval base carved into the coastline, sheltered from the open sea. It was an undertaking as ambitious as any road or aqueduct, and it gave Rome the staging ground it needed. In the Battle of Naulochus, his fleet faced Pompey's in a contest for control of the western Mediterranean. The day was hot, the sea relatively calm. Ships maneuvered, rams met hulls, and the disciplined coordination of Agrippa's men began to tell. By the day's end, Pompey's fleet was shattered. His threat to Rome's grain supply ended. It was a decisive moment, and it was Yet Agrippa was not simply a naval commander. His influence reached into the architecture and daily life of Rome itself. He oversaw the building of aqueducts, the improvement of the city's sewers, and the commissioning of public baths. He restored temples, paved streets, and even left his mark on the Roman calendar by dedicating new structures to the gods and to the people. For years, he was Augusta's most dependable lieutenant, sent to pacify provinces, to negotiate treaties, to act as guardian over the emperor's children. And in this closeness lay both his strength and his limit. Agrippa never sought the supreme power for himself. He remained in the shadow of Augustus, the indispensable second. Toward the end of his life, Agrippa's responsibilities grew heavier. He was sent east to oversee the provinces and ensure stability. He endured long journeys, political tensions, and the endless pressures of imperial service. In 12 BCE, far from the youthful vigor of his days at Naulochus, he died suddenly at the age of about 51. The cause is uncertain, recorded only as an illness, the details lost to time. His passing was deeply felt in Rome. Augustus, it is said, mourned sincerely, and the city itself bore the absence of a man who had shaped its waters, its streets, and its place in the world. Agrippa's body was returned to Rome, his ashes placed in the mausoleum of Augustus, a rare honor. Today, his name survives most visibly in stone. The great Pantheon, rebuilt later, still bears an inscription dedicating it to Marcus Agrippa, but his true legacy drifts quietly across the centuries, in the rhythm of oars on the water, in the clean flow of aqueducts, and in the enduring shape of the Roman Empire. From the life of a single man, we now turn our gaze to something stranger, an object found in the depths of the sea, a relic that may hold the whispers of knowledge long thought impossible in its age. Now, let the sunlight fade again, not into the dim wooden belly of a warship this time, but into the blue haze beneath the surface of the sea. Imagine the water growing cooler as you descend, your view shifting into a realm where light bends and objects from the past lie in quiet rest. It was in such a place, off the coast of a small Greek island named Antikythera, that divers, in the year 1901, stumbled upon a wreck. The remains of an ancient ship lay scattered across the seabed, amphorae, statues, and fragments of bronze half buried in silt. Among these treasures was something unexpected, a corroded lump of metal, unremarkable at first glance. It was crusted with the deposits of centuries, its original shape barely visible. But when it was cleaned and examined, its true nature began to emerge. A series of gears, finely crafted, interlocked with a precision far beyond what anyone imagined possible for the ancient world. Today, we know it as the Antikythera mechanism, a name as mysterious as the object itself. Thought to have been built around the 1st century BCE, it is often described as the world's first known analog computer. Its dials and wheels could track the movements of the sun, the moon, and perhaps even the known planets. It could predict eclipses, mark the timing of athletic games, and display the complex cycles of ancient astronomy. Imagine, in a world lit by oil lamps and carried forward by oil and sail, holding in your hands a device that could model the heavens with intricate accuracy. The gears were cut from bronze, their teeth so finely shaped that they mesh almost perfectly even now. Turning a small crank would have set the dials moving, the sky itself unfolding in miniature. The ship that carried it may have been a merchant vessel, or even a kind of floating treasure chest for a wealthy patron. Some scholars believe it was bound from Rhodes to Rome, perhaps as part of a shipment of luxury goods and knowledge destined for a private collection or a temple library. The question of who made it remains unanswered. Rhodes was known for its schools of astronomy and engineering, and it is possible that this was the work of a master in that tradition. Others suggest it may have come from a workshop influenced by the genius of Archimedes, whose mechanical inventions were already legendary centuries before. And yet, despite its brilliance, nothing else quite like the Antikythera mechanism has survived from antiquity. It stands alone, a singular fragment of a larger tradition we can only guess at. Was it unique? built for a single patron? Or was it simply the only survivor of a class of devices that the sea and time have claimed? Today, the original rests in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, preserved under glass. Modern reconstructions, built with the aid of X-ray imaging and patient study, can now demonstrate its function. Watching one of these replicas turn is almost hypnotic. The gentle rotation of bronze wheels, the smooth progression of dials, the slow marking of celestial events. It is an object that whispers of a lost sophistication, a reminder that the ancient world was not only muscle and stone, but also subtle calculation, delicate craftsmanship, and quiet wonder. From this quiet mystery beneath the waves, let us now return to the surface, and to a very different world, the bright, perfumed halls of those who commanded wealth and influence in Rome, where the sound of the sea was a distant, optional pleasure. Now we leave the salt air behind. Imagine stepping onto solid ground, not into the crowded streets of Rome, but along a quiet road in the countryside, or on the edge of a coastal estate. The air is warmer here, scented faintly with flowering herbs. A low wall of pale stone marks the edge of the property, and beyond it, a villa spreads out in a series of tiled roofs and columned courtyards. This is the home of a Roman senator. Inside these walls, the world is ordered and deliberate. You pass through a shaded portico, your footsteps echoing softly against the smooth floor. The stone is cool beneath your sandals, polished to a gentle sheen. The atrium is the first space to greet you, a large open room with a central pool of water, the impluvium, catching the sunlight that falls through a square opening above. The trickle of water is constant, and its reflection shimmers across the painted walls. These walls might be adorned with frescoes, scenes from mythology, landscapes, or delicate floral patterns that seem almost alive in the shifting light. From here, the villa opens into other rooms. The private quarters are quiet, their low couches draped with fine textiles brought from the east. The senator's study, or tablinum, is arranged with scrolls and writing tablets, perhaps a bronze lamp with a steady, warm flame. Beyond, the dining room, the triclinium. Here, banquets are not hurried affairs. Guests recline on couches, arranged around a low table laden with silver dishes. The air carries the scent of roasted meat, fresh bread, olives, and honeyed wine. Servants move quietly, refilling cups and placing dishes in smooth succession. The rhythm of service unbroken. Through open doors, you can see the gardens. They are laid out in precise symmetry. Gravel paths lined with trimmed box hedges, small fountains sending up gentle arcs of water. Fig trees offer shade, and the air hums with the sound of cicadas in the afternoon heat. Marble statues stand among the greenery, their expressions calm and eternal. From the senator's position, life is a series of measured obligations. Receiving clients in the morning, attending the Senate in the Forum, overseeing the affairs of the estate. Political discussions are never far from the table, though they are often veiled in polite conversation. Allies are courted with shared meals and quiet promises. Rivals are observed carefully, their intentions weighed like coins in the palm. The villa itself is a symbol, a statement of wealth, stability, and Roman order. Its beauty is not only in its walls and gardens, but in the way it separates its owner from the hardships faced by the rowers, the dock workers, and the countless others whose labor makes such a life possible. Here, the sea is not an endless horizon demanding toil. It is a view framed from a shaded terrace, enjoyed with a cup of wine in hand. As evening falls, lamps are lit, casting a warm, steady glow through the halls. The conversation softens, the gardens grow still. The sounds of the city and the coast are distant now, a faint reminder of the wider world beyond the walls. Imagine yourself standing beside a camel before sunrise. The animal shifts its weight slowly, the faint sound of its breathing the only thing breaking the quiet of the early morning. The air is cold enough that your breath is visible, but you know it will not stay that way for long. By midday, the heat will press down like a heavy blanket, and the air will be dry enough to chap your lips and sting your eyes. Your work begins long before the caravan moves. Each animal must be checked. The ropes, the packs, the harnesses, leather straps are adjusted, knots retied. Some camels protest with low guttural sounds. Others simply stand and wait, their long-lashed eyes half closed. You know them well. You know which ones are stubborn, which are skittish, and which will lag, if not nudged forward. The caravan's goods are wrapped tightly in woven cloth, bolts of silk, bags of spice, blocks of salt, carved ivory, and sometimes the simplest of things, grain, wool, or metal tools. The loads are heavy, but balanced carefully on each animal's back. A shifted weight could mean injury to the animal and trouble for the journey. When the sun finally rises, the caravan begins to move. The pace is slow, steady, the kind of rhythm that, once begun, rarely changes for hours. The sound of footsteps in the sand is soft but constant. Above you, the sky is clear and wide, the kind of blue that only comes in places far from the sea. By midday, the heat has arrived. It wraps around you and the animals alike. The air shimmers near the ground, and the path ahead seems to dance with mirages. Your clothes are loose and light, but the sun finds its way to your skin. Sweat dries almost as soon as it forms. You drink sparingly from a water skin, the leather warm from being carried against your side. Some days bring sandstorms. The wind rises without warning, carrying fine grains that sting your face and coat your teeth. You pull a cloth across your mouth and nose, guiding the camels to huddle together, their sides pressing into yours. The world becomes a blur of dust and noise until the wind dies away again. Nights on the road are a different challenge. The temperature falls quickly once the sun sets, and you draw your cloak tighter around your shoulders. The caravan makes camp, a ring of sleeping mats and packs, a few small fires carefully shielded from the wind. There is little conversation. Most eat in silence, a simple meal of flatbread, dried fruit, perhaps a little meat if it has been traded for along the way. Sleep comes in short stretches. You wake often, listening for the sound of movement in the dark. Thieves sometimes follow caravans, waiting for a moment of carelessness. And then there are the animals themselves. A camel shifting, a rope loosening, a load slipping in the night. The days blend together. The road changes, sometimes stony, sometimes soft sand, sometimes hard-packed dirt. The scenery shifts from dunes to rocky outcrops, from open plains to narrow valleys. Yet always, the work is the same. Walk, watch, adjust, lead, and rest only when the caravan stops. It is not a life of riches or comfort, but without the endless miles walked by men like you, and the slow, steady labor of the camels you tend, Silk Road would be nothing but an idea, a line on a map without breath or movement. From here, we leave the anonymous life of the camel tender and follow instead one man whose name still echoes through the story of the Silk Road, a traveler whose long road home was as winding and uncertain as the trade route itself. Now, step away from the nameless caravan and into the life of one man, a Venetian merchant, whose journey along the Silk Road became one of the most famous travel accounts in history. Marco Polo had spent many years far from home. He had walked the courtyards of Kublai Khan, crossed mountain passes where the air was thin and sharp, and traveled along rivers that carried the goods of entire empires. But for all travelers, no matter how far they have gone, there comes a time when the thought of home begins to call with a quiet persistence. By the early 1290s, Marco Polo had been in the service of the Mongol court for more than a decade. The Mongol Empire was vast, stretching across Asia, its trade routes guarded by imperial authority. Within its borders, a man could travel from one end of the known world to the other, provided he had the Khan's favor. Marco did, yet the Khan was reluctant to let him leave. Marco had proved useful, fluent in languages, skilled in diplomacy, and accustomed to long journeys. The opportunity for departure came not as a dismissal, but as a mission. A Mongol princess was to be sent west to marry into the Persian royal family. The journey would be long and potentially dangerous, and it was decided she would travel by sea, escorted by trusted envoys. Marco Polo, his father, and his uncle Maffeo were among those chosen to accompany her. They set out from the court with an escort, leaving the inland roads they had known for so many years. It was a change of rhythm, the steady pace of overland travel giving way to the unpredictable movements of ships at sea. The vessels they boarded were large, multi-masted, built for the open waters of the Indian Ocean. But the sea, unlike the road, could turn from calm to dangerous with little warning. The voyage stretched into years. The party stopped at ports along the coasts of what is now Vietnam, the Malay Peninsula, and India. At each, the caravan of the sea was restocked. Fresh water, dried fish, rice, and whatever trade goods could be exchanged or purchased. The tropical air was heavy, carrying the scent of spices, salt, and unfamiliar blossoms. Illness struck more than once during these years. Marco records, with the same measured tone he used for describing distant cities, that many in their company did not survive the journey. The princess endured, shielded by those around her, but the constant movement, the changing climates, and the ever-present risk of storms made the voyage slow and taxing. By the time they reached Persia, much had changed. The intended groom, the Count's relative, had died during the years it took to make the journey. Still, the princess was received with honor, and the formalities of alliance continued in other ways. For Marco and his family, the completion of this mission marked the moment when they could finally turn their faces toward Venice. The road home led them overland again, through Armenia, across the edges of the Black Sea, and finally into the Mediterranean world they had left decades before. The faces and languages grew more familiar, but the habits of the road remained. Marco knew the rhythm of packing at dawn, of bargaining for supplies, of moving steadily toward a distant goal. When the three men finally entered Venice, they were changed in ways that the city could not yet understand. They had seen lands and cities their fellow citizens had never imagined, carried objects from far beyond the borders of Europe, and held in their memories a map of the world drawn from years of movement. Their stories would later be written down, though Marco in his account often blurred the line between first-hand experience and tales told by others. Yet even in the measured tone of those pages, one can sense the weight of that long journey home. The patience, the endurance, and the slow unwinding of a life spent moving from the path of one man. Let us now turn our attention to a place, not on any living traveler's route, but hidden beneath the sands for centuries, waiting to be found. Let us leave the moving caravans for a moment, and imagine instead a place where the road has long since gone silent. We travel now in thought to the Taklamakan Desert, in the far west of what is now China, a place whose very name carries a warning. In local tradition, it means something like "go in and you will not come out." It is a desert of shifting sands and extremes, where life clings only in narrow strips along riverbeds or in the shelter of an oasis. Here, more than 1,000 years ago, stood the city of Naya. It was a small but thriving settlement, part of the network of oasis towns that gave the Silk Road its lifeblood. Caravans would arrive from the east or west, their animals dusty and tired, the traders eager for rest, food, and safe storage of their goods. Now imagine the sounds: the low groan of camels kneeling to be unloaded, the call of a merchant greeting an old acquaintance, the soft clink of ceramic jars as they are moved from one place to another. The air smells faintly of dust and dry wood smoke, with a hint of spices carried in the loads from distant lands. In Naya streets, people wore clothing of fine wool and silk. Archaeologists would later find fragments of these garments in remarkable condition, their colors faded but still discernible. There were homes built from wood and mud brick, some with courtyards shaded by grapevines. Wooden tablets, inscribed in the Korosti script, recorded everyday transactions, the sale of grain, the renting of animals, the settling of debts. But the desert has a way of reclaiming what people build. Over centuries, the waters that sustained Naya's orchards and fields began to shift. Perhaps due to changes in the rivers that fed them, crops failed, the oasis shrank, and the people moved away. Slowly, sand crept over the streets and into the empty rooms. Roof beams collapsed, walls wore away, and the voices of the market fell silent. For more than 1,000 years, Naya lay hidden. It was not until the early 20th century that explorers, guided by local knowledge, began to uncover what the desert had preserved. They found not just walls and tools, but pieces of daily life so fragile that their survival seemed improbable. Wooden combs, baskets, shoes still shaped to the curve of a foot. One of the most remarkable finds was a cache of documents that revealed the city's ties to distant cultures. Indian scripts, Chinese textiles, and objects that spoke of contact with lands far beyond the immediate horizon. Naya had been a crossroads, modest in size but rich in connection. Standing among the excavated ruins today, one might feel an almost dreamlike quiet. The sand still shifts with the wind, brushing softly against the remains of walls. The air is dry, and the sky is a pale, unbroken blue. It is easy to imagine the faint outlines of streets, the open doors of shops, the slow movement of people going about lives that ended centuries ago. The rediscovery of Naya reminds us that the Silk Road was not only a line between great cities like Sion and Constantinople, it was also a chain of smaller places, vulnerable to the forces of climate, politics, and time, each playing its part in the long history of exchange. From this silent ruin, we will now make our way Still along the Silk Road, but into a world that could not be more different. A world where the air is thick with perfume, the tables heavy with gold, and the rulers of an empire measure their power not in distance traveled, but in the guests they welcome to their halls. From the empty streets of Naya, we journey now to the bustling heart of an empire. It is the late 13th century, and you are in Khambalik, the great city we now know as Beijing. Here, the Mongol ruler Kublai Khan holds his court. The Silk Road leads not just to markets and desert towns, but to places like this, where wealth from across continents converges in a single dazzling space. The palace is vast, its walls enclose gardens, courtyards, and pavilions that stretch further than the eye can follow in a single glance. The air is warm with the scent of incense and the faint perfume of flowers carefully tended even in the cool seasons. Marble steps lead up to wide halls, their ceilings painted with dragons and clouds, the pillars carved and gilded so that they glow in lamplight. Tonight is a banquet night. The invitation has been extended to foreign envoys, high-ranking officials, and trusted friends of the Khan. As you walk into the great hall, the floor beneath you is smooth stone, cooled from the evening air. Above, the rafters are high and shadowed, and the light comes from hundreds of oil lamps, their flames steady in the still air. Long, low tables are set in ordered rows, each covered with cloth woven in silk, patterned with gold thread. Servants in fine robes move quietly between them, their steps soft, their hands steady as they carry dishes and cups. The first courses arrive on broad platters, roast meats flavored with unfamiliar spices, fish poached with herbs, and bowls of rice that glisten with steam. There is wine here too, not just from grapes, but from fermented grains and fruits, poured into delicate cups of porcelain. In the center of the hall, musicians play on stringed instruments, their melodies slow and deliberate, accompanied by the deep pulse of a drum. The sound is not loud, but it fills the air, a constant presence beneath the hum of voices. From time to time, dancers appear, their movements fluid, their silk sleeves tracing slow arcs in the lamplight. The banquet is more than a meal, it is a demonstration. Every detail speaks of the Khan's power and reach. The spices may come from India or the islands of Southeast Asia, the porcelain from distant kilns in the south of China, the gold and silver from mines in Central Asia. The very guests themselves are proof of the empire's vastness. Persians in richly woven robes, Chinese scholars with scrolls at their belts, merchants from Venice and Genoa with rings on their fingers. Kublai Khan himself sits at the head of the hall. His robes are thick with embroidery, his belt clasps set with polished stones. He does not speak constantly. Rather, he listens, observing the conversations around him. When he does address someone, his words are measured, and the listeners lean forward to hear. The evening moves slowly, course follows course. Between them, there is time to talk, to trade news from distant cities, to make quiet arrangements that might shape future journeys along the Silk Road. For some guests, these moments are more valuable than the gold on the tables. The chance to win favor, to secure safe passage, to gain permission to trade in distant provinces. As the night deepens, sweet dishes appear, candied fruits, spiced pastries, and a thick, sweetened milk served warm. The music softens further, the hall glowing gently in the lamplight. Servants clear away empty platters, their movements as smooth as the start of the night. When the banquet ends, it does so without haste. Guests rise slowly, bowing to the Khan before they leave, the scent of incense clinging faintly to their robes. Outside, the night air is cool and still. The streets beyond the palace are dark, but the memory of the hall's warmth and light lingers long after. Imagine it is still early morning, long before the court stirs. The kitchen is already awake. You are one of dozens of servants whose work begins before the sun has warmed the flagstones. The air is cool now, but it won't stay that way. Fires are being lit in great brick hearths, the flames licking upward, spitting gently as logs settle into embers. Soon, the heat will fill the room until every movement leaves you damp with sweat. The Tudor kitchen is not a small space. In the great houses and royal palaces, it is a sprawling set of rooms. The boiling house, the pastry room, the scullery, the larder, each has its own tasks, its own smells. In one, meat is being salted and hung. In another, dough is being kneaded on heavy wooden tables. Everywhere, the sound of work, knives on cutting boards, the thump of a cleaver through bone, the scrape of ladles in pots. Your place is at the long benches, where vegetables need chopping for the day's stews. Carrots, leeks, onions, they pile up in woven baskets and spill onto the floor. The chopping is rhythmic, almost meditative, but your hands ache after hours of it. The scent of onions lingers on your skin no matter how many times you wash. In the corner, a spit turner begins his work. The spits are long metal rods, skewered through haunches of venison or whole birds. His job is to keep them turning over the open fire, slow and steady, so the meat roasts evenly. It is hot, relentless work, the kind that leaves the front of your body flushed from the heat and your back chilled from the drafty air behind you. There are no clocks here, only the slow change in the color of the meat and the feel of the fat beginning to drip into the pans below. There is little glamour in this life. Meals for the court are grand affairs, with dozens of dishes served in multiple courses, but the credit for them rarely reaches the servants. If the food is praised, it is the cook who hears it. If it is criticized, it is the servants who bear the brunt of the disapproval. Mistakes are not easily forgiven. A dish delivered cold, a seasoning forgotten, a plate missing from the table. The noise in the kitchen builds as the day moves on. Pots boil with the scent of herbs and meat. The clatter of pewter dishes being stacked grows louder as service approaches. The air thickens with wood smoke, steam, and the tang of roasting fat. Your clothes hold the smell long after the fires burn low. When the meal is finally sent up to the great hall, carried by servers who have been waiting in the wings, there is no pause for you. The next course must be readied, and the work begins again. For those serving in the royal kitchens, the day can stretch late into the night, ending only when the last trenchers are cleared and the last pan scrubbed clean in cold water. It is a life measured in tasks completed, in the constant tending of fires, in the small satisfaction of a dish well prepared, even if you never see it tasted. And tomorrow, before the sun rises, it will all begin again. From these smoky, bustling kitchens, we will soon climb the steps to another world entirely, the chambers of a queen whose fate has been told and retold, but who once walked these same stone corridors, the scent of the kitchen fires drifting faintly toward her rooms. Imagine the kitchen smoke drifting upward, through the narrow service staircases, curling faintly toward the grander spaces above. Somewhere beyond that haze, in the bright chambers of the royal apartments, Anne Boleyn once walked. Anne's story begins, not in the heart of England, but across the Channel. Born around the turn of the 16th century, the exact year still a matter of quiet debate, she spent much of her youth abroad, first in the Netherlands, and then in France, serving in the courts of noblewomen and queens. There, she absorbed the manners, the language, and the polished grace of continental life. When she returned to England, she was not immediately at the center of power. She served as a lady-in-waiting to Queen Catherine of Aragon, wife of Henry VIII. Yet it was here, in the carefully arranged world of the Tudor court, that Henry's attention turned toward her. Anne was known for her quick mind, her sharp wit, and her ability to hold conversation as skillfully as any courtier. At first, Henry sought her as a mistress, a role that might have brought her influence but not a crown. Anne refused. Whether out of personal conviction, ambition, or both, she would not be drawn into his circle without the promise of marriage. This refusal only deepened the king's interest. Their relationship unfolded against a backdrop of political tension. Henry's marriage to Catherine had not produced a male heir, and the king, increasingly anxious for the security of his line, sought an annulment. The Pope would not grant it. What began as a personal desire became a political and religious upheaval. Anne became central to that change. Henry's determination to marry her contributed to England's break from the Roman Catholic Church, the creation of the Church of England, and his declaration as its supreme head. In 1533, Anne and Henry were married in a quiet ceremony. Not long after, she was crowned queen in a lavish coronation, a moment of triumph for a woman who had once been a lady. But the life of a queen was not one of unbroken security. Anne's position depended on her ability to give Henry the son he longed for. Her first child, born later that same year, was a daughter, the future Elizabeth I, though Elizabeth would become one of England's greatest monarchs. At the time her birth was a disappointment to Henry. Anne did conceive again, but the pregnancies that followed ended in miscarriage. Court gossip swirled. Enemies, both political and personal, gathered. The same court that had once celebrated her rise began to whisper about her downfall. By 1536, the king's affections had shifted to Jane Seymour, one of Anne's ladies-in-waiting. Accusations were leveled against Anne, charges of adultery, treason, and even plotting against the king. Historians still debate the truth of these claims, but in the political climate of the Tudor court, truth was often less important than Anne was tried and found guilty. In May of that year, she was taken to the Tower of London. On a quiet morning, dressed in a simple gown, she met her end with composure, speaking calmly to those present. Her life had risen and fallen in less than a decade, yet the echo of her story has carried for centuries. From the life of Anne Boleyn, the court turns its attention outward, to the sea, where Henry VIII's ambitions were not confined to land alone. There, one of his prized possessions, the great warship Mary Rose, would meet an abrupt and final fate. Imagine the air of the court replaced by the scent of salt water and the creak of timber beneath your feet. The year is 1545, and the Solent, the strait between the southern coast of England and the Isle of Wight, is busy with the movement of ships. Among them is Henry VIII's prized warship, the Mary Rose. Launched in 1511, the Mary Rose was a product of Henry's early reign, a time when he sought to expand and modernize England's navy. She was a large carrack, broad and sturdy, her hull built from oak, her sides rising high above the water. Her decks were lined with gun ports, for she was one of the first English ships designed to carry heavy artillery along her flanks. For more than 3 decades, the Mary Rose served in the King's fleet. She fought in campaigns against France and was refitted more than once as naval technology advanced. By the summer of 1545, England was once again at war with France. The French fleet, hundreds of ships strong, had gathered off the coast, and the Mary Rose was called to defend the realm. On the morning of July 19th, the ship was in the midst of maneuvering, preparing to engage the enemy. From the shore, Henry VIII himself watched from the ramparts of Southsea Castle. The water was calm, the wind steady. Then, in the space of moments, the course of the Mary Rose changed forever. Contemporary accounts differ on the cause. Some say she turned too sharply under full sail, allowing water to rush in through her open gun ports. Others suggest she was struck by a sudden gust of wind, or that the weight of her armament and crew shifted unexpectedly. Whatever the reason, she began to list sharply to one side. Water poured into her lower decks. Those aboard would have had little warning. Men scrambled for the rigging. Others tried to climb toward the upper decks. The Mary Rose heeled over, and within minutes, she was gone. Her masts, still visible for a short time above the water before slipping below entirely. Of the perhaps 400 to 500 men on board, only a few dozen survived. The rest were claimed by the Solent, along with the ship herself. For centuries, she lay buried in the silt, the cold waters preserving her timbers and the countless objects trapped within. It was not until 1971 that divers located the remains of the Mary Rose. Over the next decade, a complex operation brought her slowly back to the surface. In 1982, before a live television audience, the great hull rose from the sea for the first time in over 400 years. The artifacts recovered tell quiet stories of Tudor life at sea. Longbows, pewter dishes, leather shoes, musical instruments, and personal items like combs and gaming pieces. There were cooking pots still blackened from shipboard fires, and even the skeleton of the ship's dog, likely kept to control rats on board. Today, the preserved remains of the Mary Rose rest in a climate-controlled museum in Portsmouth. Visitors walk alongside her timbers, looking into cases that hold the belongings of men who once worked her decks. It is a rare and tangible link to the Tudor Navy, a ship that served for decades, only to vanish in minutes. From the quiet of the museum, let us return to the Tudor court, but this time to the polished heart of royal life, the great halls and private chambers of Hampton Court Palace, where the air was scented not with salt, but with beeswax polish, rich fabrics, and the faint trace of spices from the kitchens below. Step now from the briny air of Portsmouth Harbour into the still, sheltered world of Hampton Court Palace. The walls rise ahead of you in warm red brick, their surfaces patterned with pale stone. Turrets and chimneys stand against the sky, and the great archway of the main gate opens into a courtyard paved with cobblestones worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. Within, the palace is a place of careful design. The great hall greets you with its high timber-bird roof, each beam carved and decorated, the open space flooded with light from tall stained-glass windows. Sunlight falls in soft colors across the long tables and the tapestries that cover the walls. Vast woven scenes of hunting parties, banquets, and allegorical figures. The air smells faintly of beeswax polish and wood smoke from the great hearth at the far end. For a courtier or a visiting noble, life here moves to a measured rhythm. The day begins with attendance on the king or queen, followed by councils, audiences, and carefully staged social occasions. The palace is not simply a home. It is a stage upon which the authority and grandeur of the monarchy are constantly on display. Away from the public rooms, the private chambers are quieter. Here, corridors narrow, and the floors are softened with woven rush matting. The royal apartments are lined with rich fabrics, velvets in deep crimson, embroidered cushions, and curtains that can be drawn to keep out the winter chill. In the windows, glass panes filter the daylight, a luxury in an age when most homes still had only shutters. From the windows of the palace, you might see the formal gardens, geometric beds edged with low hedges, gravel paths that crunch underfoot, and fountains that murmur softly into stone basins. In spring and summer, the air carries the scent of roses and lavender. Beyond the gardens, the River Thames curves gently past, a watery highway that connects the palace to London and beyond. Meals in Hampton Court are served with quiet ceremony. In the presence chambers, tables are set with pewter and silver, the food carried in by servants who move with practiced ease. The dishes are not hurried. Each is part of a sequence, from savory pies to roasted meats, and finally to sweetmeats and preserved fruits. Musicians may play softly from a gallery above, their melodies drifting down like threads of sound. Beneath the calm surface, the palace is also a place of politics. Conversations in shaded galleries can shape alliances or spark rivalries. A quiet word in the ear of the right person might alter the course of a career. Even the arrangement of seating at a feast, or the order in which guests are received, carries meaning in this world of careful hierarchies. And yet, there is also leisure here. On fine days, the courtyards filled with games of bowls or tennis played on the palace's enclosed court. In the evenings, there may be dancing in the great hall, the light of hundreds of candles reflected in polished silver and gilded trim. The palace is both a sanctuary and a stage, a place where life is ordered and refined, yet never entirely free from the currents of ambition and change that run beneath its surface. Imagine arriving at the monastery gates just before dawn. The sky is still dark, but a faint light begins to touch the horizon. Your breath hangs in the air, and the sound of the heavy wooden doors closing behind you marks the beginning of a new life. As a novice monk, your days are not yet entirely your own. You follow the guidance of the older brothers, learning the rules of the order, the prayers, and the duties that fill each hour. The first task comes before most of the outside world is awake. The call to matins, the night office. The bell rings, low and insistent, echoing off the stone walls. You leave the narrow bed in your cell, the rush matting cool under your bare feet, and make your way to the chapel. The floor is cold stone. The air inside is even colder. Candles flicker against the darkness, their light reflecting in the polished brass of the candlesticks. The scent is of beeswax, old wood, and the faint trace of incense from earlier prayers. The chanting begins, long, slow syllables in Latin, rising and falling with the same unchanging rhythm. You join your voice to the others, though you are still learning the words. When the service ends, there is no return to sleep. The day's work has begun. In the scriptorium, rows of desks wait, each with a sheet of parchment, a pot of ink, and quills cut and ready. Your task is to copy text, perhaps scripture, perhaps a commentary, with slow precision. You sit in a high-backed chair, the wood hard against your spine, and bend over the page. The only sounds are the scratching of quills, the shifting of parchment, and the occasional cough from a fellow scribe. The hours are marked by the bells, prime, terce, sext, none, each one calling you to prayer, then back to work. Meals are taken in the refectory, where long tables are set with wooden trenchers and spoons. The food is plain, a pottage of barley and beans, dark bread, and perhaps a little cheese if the stores allow. The broth is warm, but without spices. It tastes only of the vegetables and grains boiled together. As you eat, a reader stands at a lectern and recites scripture or the writings of the saints. There is no conversation. The work of a novice is not limited to copying texts. You may be sent to the garden to tend the herbs, to the fields to help with planting or harvest, or to the kitchens to carry water from the well. On cold days, the wind finds its way through the cloisters, open arches, and your hands are stiff before the work is done. On warm days, the air is still and heavy, and the wool of your habit clings to your skin. Evening brings vespers, the soft glow of candles once again lighting the chapel. The chants are slower now, the light dimmer, and the air carries the scent of smoke from the torches lit outside. Compline follows. The final prayers before rest, and you return to your cell. It is a small space, with a wooden bed, a thin blanket, and perhaps a small chest for your few possessions. Lying there, you hear the faint creak of wood, the whisper of the wind through the shutters, and the quiet breathing of the monastery at night. The day has been long, but tomorrow will begin the same way, with the dark sky, the cold stone floor, and the sound of the bell calling you to rise. From the life of a novice, we will soon turn to the life of a woman, who, though bound by the rules of her order, became a voice heard far beyond the cloister walls. Hildegard of Bingen. From the quiet anonymity of a novice monk's day, we turn now to a figure whose voice, writings, and visions carried far beyond the cloister. Hildegard of Bingen was born in the year 1098, in the Rhineland region of what is now Germany. She was the 10th child in her family, and, according to the customs of the time, she was dedicated to the church from a young age. As a child, Hildegard experienced visions, vivid, complex scenes that she would later describe in extraordinary detail. At first, these were known only to those close to her. Her early education came in the form of religious instruction, prayer, and practical skills, guided by the women with whom she lived in seclusion. By the time she reached adulthood, Hildegard was part of a small community of women attached to a Benedictine monastery. Life there followed the rule of Saint Benedict, structured around prayer, work, and study. Yet even in this ordered life, Hildegard's talents began to set her apart. She learned not only the chants and psalms, but also the properties of plants, the healing uses of herbs, and the structure of music. In her 30s, Hildegard became the leader of her community. Her responsibilities grew to include the guidance of the younger women, the administration of the convent's affairs, and the maintenance of its relationship with the wider monastic world. But it was her visions that brought her renown. For years, she hesitated to speak publicly about them. Eventually, encouraged by her confessor, and with the approval of church authorities, she began to write them down. The result was a series of works that blended theology, vivid imagery, and moral instruction. Her most famous, Civius, short for Know the Ways, contained intricate descriptions of her visions. Alongside her interpretations of their meaning, Hildegard's writing extended beyond the spiritual. She composed music, soaring fluid chants that broke from some of the conventions of her time, allowing melodies to stretch and rise in ways that reflected her own creative voice. She also compiled extensive works on natural history and medicine, recording her knowledge of plants, animals, and the human body. Despite the restrictions on women's roles in the medieval church, Hildegard corresponded with popes, emperors, and other prominent figures. Her letters, many of which survive, are direct, confident, and sometimes sharply critical. She wrote to admonish, to advise, and to encourage reform, speaking with a moral authority rooted in her religious life. Her later years were active ones. She traveled to preach in towns and cities along the Rhine, an unusual undertaking for a woman of her station. Wherever she went, she drew crowds, people curious to hear the words of the abbess who saw visions. Hildegard died in 1179, in her 80s, after a life that bridged the cloister and the wider world. In the centuries since, she has been remembered not only as a mystic, but also as a composer, a healer, and a thinker whose work reflects a mind deeply engaged with both the spiritual and the natural realms. From her illuminated pages and music-filled chapels, we will turn now to another kind of manuscript, one that remains silent in a way Hildegard's never was, a book whose language has never been deciphered, and whose illustrations seem to come from a place both familiar and strange. The Voynich manuscript. From the ordered, purposeful writing of Hildegard, we move now to a book whose purpose, and even language, have resisted understanding for centuries. It is known today as the Voynich manuscript, after the rare book dealer Wilfrid Voynich, who acquired it in 1912. But its origins reach far further back, into the shadows of the medieval period. The manuscript is not especially large, about the size of a modern notebook, but its pages, made of fine vellum, are covered in writing that no one has ever been able to read. The script is fluid, consistent, and entirely unknown, with loops, flourishes, and characters that resemble no known alphabet. It is as if the writer drew from a language that existed only within the walls of their own mind. Interspersed with the writing are illustrations, delicate, detailed, and often puzzling. Some pages show plants, but many of these plants are unfamiliar. Their leaves, roots, and flowers arranged in ways that seem almost plausible, but do not match any known species. Other sections contain diagrams of what appear to be astronomical or astrological charts, suns, moons, and stars arranged in careful, circular patterns. Perhaps most curious are the bathing scenes. Small human figures, often unclothed, standing or reclining in pools connected by elaborate networks of pipes and vessels. These images are painted in soft greens and blues, their style unmistakably medieval, yet their meaning elusive. Radiocarbon dating of the vellum suggests the manuscript was created in the early 15th century, likely between 1404 and 1438. The ink and pigments match those used in other works of that time, and yet no one knows who made it, for what purpose, or why the language it contains has never been seen elsewhere. Over the centuries, many have tried to solve its mystery. Some believed it to be a coded medical text, perhaps the work of an alchemist or herbalist seeking to guard their knowledge. Others thought it might be a work of pure invention, a kind of artful curiosity with no deeper meaning. Still others have speculated that it could have been created as an elaborate hoax, though the level of detail and effort makes that seem unlikely. Modern cryptographers, historians, and linguists have all taken their turn. Computers have analyzed the patterns of its symbols, comparing them to known languages, but no definitive key has emerged. The Voynich manuscript remains unread, its hundreds of lines of text still holding their secrets. Today, it is kept at the Benedictine Rare Book and Manuscript Library at Yale University, where it rests in controlled conditions to preserve its fragile pages. High-resolution scans have made it possible for anyone in the world to turn its virtual pages, to study its careful handwriting and strange illustrations. But each reader encounters the same experience, the sense of almost understanding, of being on the edge of comprehension, only to find that the meaning slips away. There is a quietness to its mystery, not the urgency of a code that must be cracked for survival, but the slow, unyielding puzzle of something made long ago, for reasons we may never know. From this silent book, we return to the monastery, not to the scriptorium, but to the abbot's table, where the rules of hospitality bring visitors into the cloister for a rare sharing of food, drink, and conversation. From the scriptorium's quiet and the locked cabinets of mysterious books, we now walk toward a different part of the monastery, the abbot's hall. This is not the busy refectory, where the brothers take their meals in silence, listening to a reading. This is a smaller, more private chamber, reserved for the reception of important visitors. The air here is warmer, the hearth at one end of the room casting a steady glow over the long oak table. The light plays on the polished surface, where pewter dishes have been set in careful arrangement. A woven tapestry hangs on the wall, its colors muted by the passing years, perhaps a scene of saints, or a landscape threaded with rivers and forests. The guests are few in number, but chosen with care. A traveling nobleman, an emissary from another abbey, perhaps a wealthy patron whose gifts have funded repairs to the church roof or the purchase of new land. These meals are part of the monastery's diplomacy, a way to honor benefactors, strengthen alliances, and ensure the abbey's place in the wider world. The food is more generous than in the brothers' daily fare. There is still bread, but it is finer, baked from white flour sifted to remove the coarse bran. A soft cheese rests beside it, and small dishes of butter glisten in the lamplight. Bowls of thick pottage are set before each guest, the broth enriched with herbs from the abbey garden, and the flavor of meat reserved for these occasions. On feast days, there might be roasted fowl, its skin browned in the kitchen's great hearth. Honey cakes, spiced with cinnamon or cloves brought at great expense from far-off lands, may follow. Pitchers of ale and jugs of wine are brought to the table, the wine sweetened with a little honey to soften its edge. The conversation is quiet but steady. The abbot listens as much as he speaks, nodding at news from the surrounding countryside, offering counsel on disputes, and discussing the affairs of the church with the measured tone of a man accustomed to weighing his words. The visitors, in turn, speak of their own travels, their lands, or the political currents beyond the monastery walls. Between the exchanges, there are long, comfortable silences, the sound of firewood shifting in the grate, the soft scrape of a knife cutting bread, the muted clink of a cup set down. Outside, the cloister is dark, the only light coming from the torches fixed to the walls. The wind moves gently through the arches, carrying the scent of damp earth and stone. When the meal draws to a close, the guests are shown to their chambers, often simple rooms within the guest house. The abbot will return to his own quarters, perhaps stopping for a final prayer in the chapel, the candles there burning low. For the guests, this night will be remembered for the warmth of the welcome and the measured grace of the host. For the abbot, it is one more part of the rhythm of the monastery, an evening where the rule of hospitality meets the quiet dignity of the cloistered life. Imagine waking before sunrise, the desert still in shadow, the air cool enough to hold a hint of comfort. You rise from a simple mat, stretched limbs already stiff from yesterday's labor, and join the line of workers making their way toward the quarry. There is no rush, the work will wait, but the rhythm of life here is dictated by the sun, and you must take every advantage of the early light. The quarry is a raw wound in the earth. Blocks of limestone or granite are exposed in stepped terraces, their pale surfaces reflecting what little light there is at this hour. By midday, they will be blinding. The air is already dry, and each movement stirs a faint haze of dust that will cling to skin and clothing alike. Your tools are simple, copper chisels that must be resharpened often, wooden mallets worn smooth, dolerite pounders for breaking tougher stone. There are no machines here, only muscle, patience, and a practiced understanding of how stone behaves under force. You squat beside a marked line, place the chisel, and strike. The sound is sharp and steady, a rhythm repeated countless times across the quarry floor. The work is slow. Each block must be freed from the bedrock with care, channels cut deep enough to allow wedges to be driven in. The heat builds as the sun climbs, and the pale stone reflects it back, making the air feel heavier. You stop occasionally to wipe sweat from your face, but the dust clings regardless, mixing with the salt on your skin. The foreman walks the site, calling out instructions, checking the progress of each team. There is little room for error. A fractured block means wasted time and wasted stone. The most skilled cutters can read the rock, knowing where to place each strike, sensing the faint vibrations that warn of flaws within. When a block is finally freed, it must be moved. Ropes of twisted plant fiber are looped around it, and a team of men works in unison to drag it onto a sled. The sled itself is hauled across the ground, water sometimes poured in front to dampen the sand and reduce friction. Even so, the effort is immense, the cords biting into your hands, your feet braced against the shifting ground. Meals are taken on site, coarse bread, onions, perhaps dried fish or dates if supplies allow. The water is warm from the sun, but welcome nonetheless. There is no shade except what you can make yourself, crouching beside a block or beneath a scrap of woven reed. The afternoon stretches long, the sun presses down, and the air shimmers above the stone. Every movement stirs the dust until it coats your tongue and leaves your throat dry. The rhythm of the chisel slows as the heat peaks, but the work continues, each strike wearing at the stone and at you in equal measure. When the day's labor ends, you walk back in the fading light, shoulders aching, hands stiff. The quarry will wait for you tomorrow, unchanged but for the marks you and your fellows have made. The blocks will be hauled away to become walls, pillars, and statues, their origins hidden in the finished grandeur of temples and tombs. From the open quarry floor, we will soon step into the world of one who commanded such labor, a pharaoh whose vision and will shaped some of Egypt's most enduring monuments. Hatshepsut's story begins in the cool stone halls of the royal palace at Thebes. Around the early 16th century BCE, she was the daughter of Pharaoh Thutmose I and his chief wife, Ahmose, a position that gave her the highest pedigree in the land. From the start, her life was steeped in ceremony, surrounded by the measured rhythms of palace life, priests chanting in temple courtyards, the scent of lotus flowers in ornamental pools, and the steady comings and goings of officials bearing messages sealed in clay. As a child, Hatshepsut was educated in the skills expected of a royal daughter. She learned to read hieroglyphs, to recite religious texts, and to understand the complexities of Egyptian administration. She watched her father receive envoys from foreign lands, saw the offerings laid before the gods, and grew familiar with the rituals that bound the pharaoh's authority to divine will. Her life changed with her father's death. She married her half-brother, Thutmose II, as was customary for royal succession, and became his great royal wife. For a time, her role was supportive, presiding over religious festivals, overseeing the palace households, and maintaining the dignity of the court. Yet Hatshepsut was not content to remain in the background. When Thutmose II died young, leaving an infant heir, Thutmose III, the course of her life shifted dramatically. Officially, she was to act as regent, ruling on behalf of the child until he came of age. But over the following years, Hatshepsut began to assume the full titles and regalia of a pharaoh. She had herself depicted in statues wearing the Nenes headdress, the false beard, and the kilt, traditionally reserved for kings. In inscriptions, she referred to herself with male pronouns, not to deny her womanhood, but to place herself firmly within the lineage of Egypt's rulers. Her reign, which lasted more than 2 decades, was marked by stability, prosperity, and remarkable building projects. Perhaps her most famous achievement was the mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri, a sweeping, terraced complex built against the cliffs on the west bank of the Nile. Its colonnades seemed to rise naturally from the rock, the light shifting across their smooth surfaces as the sun moves through the day. Reliefs carved into the walls tell stories of her divine birth, her coronation, and her trading expedition to the fabled land of Punt. This expedition is one of the highlights of her reign. Ships sailed south along the Red Sea, returning laden with exotic goods, myrrh trees to be planted in temple gardens, gold, ivory, fragrant resins, and strange animals unseen in Egypt before. These treasures were not merely luxuries, they were symbols of Egypt's reach and Hatshepsut's ability to bring the distant world into harmony with her rule. Throughout her time on the throne, Hatshepsut maintained a careful balance between political authority and religious legitimacy. She sponsored the priesthood, restored temples, and upheld the traditions that connected the pharaoh to the gods. Yet she also left her own mark, blending innovation with respect for the past. When her reign ended, likely with her death, her successor, Thutmose III, sought to erase many of her monuments and inscriptions. Statues were smashed, her name chiseled away from temple walls. For centuries, her story was obscured. Only in the modern era, through archaeology and the patient study of hieroglyphic texts, has her legacy been restored. Today, she stands as one of the most successful and intriguing rulers of ancient Egypt, a woman who claimed the title of pharaoh and redefined what it meant to hold that power. From the life of a ruler who commanded vast building projects, we will now turn to the monuments themselves, and to a mystery hidden within their stone walls. In the next part, we explore the pyramids, secret chambers, and what modern discoveries suggest they may hold. The pyramids rise from the Giza Plateau, like vast, silent sentinels. From a distance, their weathered limestone blocks blend into the pale desert sky, their edges softened by thousands of years. They have stood longer than any living memory, the product of countless hands and the vision of rulers determined to secure their place in eternity. For much of recorded history, what lay within these monumental structures was a matter of conjecture. Ancient travelers speculated about hidden passages, buried treasure, and sacred relics. Over centuries, many chambers were explored, some plundered, some preserved, but the sense remained that the pyramids held secrets still undiscovered. In recent decades, modern technology has allowed archaeologists to peer inside without moving a single block, using a method known as muon radiography, a technique that measures the paths of cosmic particles passing through stone. Researchers have detected previously unknown spaces within the Great Pyramid of Khufu. These voids, as they are called, appear as dark shapes in the dense limestone, their purpose and contents still a mystery. One such space, located above the Grand Gallery, is large enough to rival the known chambers. Its placement has led to many theories. Perhaps it is a relieving chamber, designed to reduce weight and pressure on the passages below. Perhaps it is a storage space for ritual objects. Or perhaps, as some suggest, it is a hidden room whose function was known only to the pyramid's builders. These discoveries bring more questions than answers. No one has yet entered the voids, and in keeping with preservation ethics, archaeologists proceed with caution. To breach a wall risks damaging the structure and the delicate balance that has held for millennia. Instead, researchers continue to refine their imaging techniques, mapping every subtle shift in density, hoping to reconstruct the layout of these hidden places in 3 dimensions. The idea of secret chambers is not new to Egyptian history. Ancient workers sometimes left concealed passages and sealed rooms within temples and tombs. Some were used to store tools and construction materials. Others were part of religious rituals, designed to hide sacred statues or offerings from all but the highest priests. In the case of the pyramids, the possibilities multiply, especially when one considers the symbolic importance of the king's burial place. Imagine, for a moment, the pyramid as it stood when newly completed. The casing stones were smooth and white, reflecting the desert sun until it gleamed like a jewel against the sand. At its base, priests conducted rituals, incense curling into the air. Within, passageways led to chambers lined with polished granite, the air cool and still. Somewhere, beyond walls untouched for over 4,000 years, these voids wait, empty or filled, known or unknowable. The mystery of the hidden chambers is a reminder that even the most studied monuments can keep their secrets. Each discovery offers a glimpse into the minds of the ancient builders, practical in their engineering, but also deeply symbolic in their design. Whether these voids are structural or ceremonial, their presence adds another layer to the complex story of Egypt's most enduring monuments. From the cool, shadowed corridors of the pyramids, we will step into a very different kind of interior, one filled with warmth, light, music, and abundance. Our journey will end at the feasts along the Nile, where the wealthy and powerful gathered to enjoy the pleasures that the labor of so many had made possible. Evening on the Nile has a way of softening the edges of the day. The sun dips toward the western horizon, casting the water in shifting gold. A barge glides toward a private landing, its sail catching the last of the light. Musicians sit cross-legged on the deck, plucking at lutes and striking hand drums in a steady, unhurried rhythm. Ahead lies a villa belonging to a nobleman, a residence designed for both comfort and display, where tonight a feast will take place. Inside, the air is cooler, the stone floors smooth under bare feet. Oil lamps flicker in wall niches, their flames reflected in polished copper vessels. The scent of roasting meat drifts from the kitchens, mingling with the sweetness of lotus and blue water lily, placed in shallow bowls along the corridors. Guests arrive in their finest linen, garments crisp and white, edged with pleats that catch the light. Women wear wide collars of faience beads in blues and greens, and men bind their hair with narrow gold bands. Servants offer small cups of wine mixed with water and perfumed with herbs. The conversation is quiet at first, a low murmur beneath the music, but grows more animated as the night unfolds. The dining space is not set with a single long table, but with low tables scattered across the room, each holding trays of bread, bowls of stewed lentils, roasted waterfowl, and fish seasoned with coriander and cumin. There are figs and dates, fresh melon, and loaves sweetened with honey. The food is shared from the center, each guest taking small portions, savoring the combinations of flavors. Entertainment accompanies the meal. Dancers move slowly at first, arms sweeping in curves, fingers tipped with gold-colored cones that catch the lamplight. The musicians change tempo, a flute joining the strings, the beat of the drum a quiet pulse beneath it all. At times, poetry is recited, verses praising the gods, the river, or the generosity of the host. For the powerful, such feasts are more than indulgence. They are opportunities to reinforce alliances, to speak of trade agreements, temple endowments, and political obligations. These conversations are rarely urgent, unfolding instead in careful, measured exchanges between sips of wine and bites of bread. As the evening deepens, servants bring in jars of cool water from clay stands, the outside of each vessel damp from condensation. Musicians play softer now, the rhythm slowing, the melodies longer and lower. The guests linger, not eager to leave the warmth of the lamps and the easy companionship. Beyond the villa walls, the Nile moved steadily toward the sea, carrying with it the faint echoes of the feast, laughter, music, the chime of vessels meeting in a quiet toast. The Arctic has a way of humbling even the most determined travelers. In the 19th century, when the age of sail still ruled the seas, a voyage into those frozen waters was a venture that demanded patience, skill, and a willingness to endure discomfort for months on end. The rewards could be great: barrels of whale oil, valuable baleen, and the prestige of returning from such a distant and dangerous place. Yet for the vast majority who undertook these voyages, the experience was defined not by the profit, but by the constant cold, the endless work, and the slow passage of time, measured only by the rhythm of the ice and the sea. Tonight, we will step into that world, not with haste or urgency, but with the steady pace of the ship itself. moving slowly through the narrative, as if through an endless expanse of grey water. We will begin among the crew of a whaling ship in the mid-1800s. Men who lived in cramped quarters, ate from the same weathered wooden bowls, and worked in conditions that would test anyone's endurance. From there, we will follow the tragic fate of Sir John Franklin's expedition, whose disappearance gripped the imagination of an entire nation. We will drift toward the mystery of the Mary Celeste, a ship found adrift with no sign of her crew. And finally, we will step ashore into the warm, carpeted drawing rooms of a shipping magnate's home, where the life of the sea was remembered from a safe and distant place. So let the pace slow. Imagine the creak of timbers, the muted crash of waves against the hull, and the faint smell of tar and salt in the air. Imagine standing on a deck slick with frozen spray, your breath forming clouds in the frigid air. The horizon is an unbroken line of white and grey, where the sea meets the low winter sky. The ship is small by modern standards, its masts tall, its sails stiff in the cold wind, but it is all that stands between you and the vast emptiness of the Arctic Ocean. Life aboard a whaling vessel in the mid-19th century was defined by routine, and that routine was relentless. You might be roused in the middle of the night by the call of the lookout, straining to spot the dark shape of a whale's back amid the churning water. Or you might spend the better part of a week simply waiting, the ship drifting in open leads between sheets of pack ice, the crew passing the time with small repairs, sharpening harpoons, or mending worn clothing with stiff, calloused fingers. Below deck, space was scarce. The crew's quarters were cramped, lit only by dim oil lamps that left the air heavy with smoke. Hammocks were slung close together, and privacy was almost non-existent. The air carried a blend of scents, damp wool, salt-water-soaked wood, and the ever-present hint of rancid provisions. Food was functional, not enjoyable. Hardtack that needed to be soaked before it could be chewed, salted meat that had long since lost its freshness, and whatever preserved goods could be coaxed from the ship's stores. Occasionally, if the weather and the hunt were kind, there might be fresh meat from a seabird or fish caught along the way. The work, when it came, was brutal. Lowering the longboats into icy seas required coordination and strength, the oarsmen pulling hard against the current as they pursued a whale. The moment a harpoon struck home, the real labor began. The chase could last hours, with the crew enduring spray, wind, and numbing cold. Once the whale was brought alongside the ship, the process of cutting in began, slicing long strips of blubber from the carcass and hauling them aboard, where they would be rendered into oil in massive iron tripods, heated over open flames. Even in freezing conditions, the heat from the tryworks filled the deck with a thick, greasy smoke that clung to skin and clothing. There was no real escape from the elements. On calm days, the sun could glitter on the ice with a deceptive warmth, but the wind would soon remind you of where you were. On stormy nights, the deck could be a treacherous place, with waves breaking over the bow and icy water finding its way into every seam. Yet the crew persisted, because each barrel of oil meant more profit for the owners, and more pay, however meager, for the men who risked everything to earn it. Days and weeks blurred together into a rhythm of watch rotations, maintenance, and hunting. Even in moments of quiet, the sound of the sea was constant. The groan of the ship's hull against the ice, the whistle of wind through the rigging, and the distant cracks of shifting floes. This was life on a whaling ship in 1850, unglamorous, unforgiving, and unending until the voyage was over. From the icy deck of the Weir, we will soon move into a different kind of Arctic story, one not of profit and return, but of disappearance and mystery. The story of Sir John Franklin's final voyage is one of the most haunting episodes in the history of Arctic exploration. It begins, as many such tales do, with optimism and ceremony. In May of 1845, two stout ships, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, set sail from England. Their mission was clear: to chart and navigate the fabled Northwest Passage, a sea route through the Arctic connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. At the helm was Franklin himself, a naval officer with decades of experience, known both for his determination and for his earlier Arctic journeys. The ships were well provisioned, at least by the standards of the time. Stores included preserved meats, ship's biscuit, tinned soup, and a selection of teas and spirits. They carried coal for heating, and even a small library for the crew's leisure. The expedition had every reason to believe they were prepared for the long months ahead. The Erebus and Terror were specially reinforced for ice travel, their hulls strengthened with thick timbers and iron plating. Yet, as the months passed and no word returned, concern began to grow. Search efforts were launched, but the Arctic is vast and slow to give up its secrets. What little was eventually discovered came in fragments, a message left in a cairn, human remains found years later, scattered artifacts preserved in the permafrost. These clues painted a grim picture. The ships became trapped in heavy pack ice near King William Island and remained so for over a year. Imagine the slow erosion of hope as the long polar winter set in. The sun disappeared for months at a time, leaving only a dim twilight. Rations would have grown monotonous and perhaps suspect. Later analyses of preserved food suggested contamination with lead, likely from the soda used to seal tins. Illness would have been a constant threat: scurvy, frostbite, and other ailments born of cold and malnutrition. By the spring of 1848, the situation was desperate enough that the surviving crew abandoned the ships and attempted to trek south toward the Canadian mainland. None would survive the journey. The Arctic, vast, cold, and indifferent, claimed them all. Over the years, more expeditions uncovered more remains. A leather-bound journal here, a fragment of uniform there. Inuit oral histories offered additional clues, speaking of starving men and abandoned ships, and in the 21st century, underwater searches finally located the wrecks of both Erebus and Terror, astonishingly well preserved in the frigid waters. These discoveries brought closure to some questions, but not all. For many details of the crew's final months remain unknown. The Franklin expedition became a cautionary tale, but also a source of enduring fascination. It spoke to the limits of human endurance and the unforgiving nature of the Arctic. It also reflected a time when the drive for exploration was as much about prestige and empire as it was about the quest for knowledge. From this story of icebound tragedy, we drift toward a different kind of maritime mystery, not one frozen in place, but set adrift upon an empty ocean. The enigma of the Mary Celeste. In the cold early days of December 1872, the brigantine Mary Celeste was sighted drifting some 400 miles east of the Azores. She was not adrift in the chaotic way of a storm-wrecked vessel. Her sails were partly set, her hull intact, and she rode the swells with no sign of distress. Yet, when the crew of the Dei Gratia, the ship that came upon her, boarded to investigate, they found something deeply unsettling. The Mary Celeste was entirely deserted. The ship was seaworthy. Her cargo, over 1,700 barrels of industrial alcohol, was untouched. The crew's belongings, clothing, and even valuables remained in place. The galley still held utensils and provisions, though the stove was cold. The ship's logbook ended abruptly on November 25th, with nothing hinting at imminent danger. The lifeboat was missing, suggesting the crew had departed voluntarily, though why they would do so in the middle of the Atlantic remains one of maritime history's lingering puzzles. Imagine stepping into that empty space, the gentle creak of timbers under sail, the wind's low hum through rigging, the faint, salt-worn scent of the sea, mingling with the sharper aroma from the cargo below decks. No voices, no footsteps, no human presence, only the slow rhythm of the ocean. Speculation began almost immediately after the Mary Celeste was brought into Gibraltar for salvage proceedings. Some suggested piracy, though nothing was stolen. Others theorized mutiny, though there was no evidence of violence. A more practical possibility was that fumes from the alcohol cargo, perhaps combined with rough weather, led the captain to fear an explosion and order an evacuation. If the crew had lowered the lifeboat in haste, they may have been unable to reboard the ship, eventually succumbing to the elements. Over the decades, the story was embellished and retold, often in ways that blurred fact and fiction. Fictionalized accounts, even one by a young Arthur Conan Doyle, transformed the Mary Celeste into a near-mythical ghost ship, her fate whispered about in dockside taverns and shipping offices alike. But the truth, whatever it may be, is simpler, quieter, and likely lost to time. The Mary Celeste returned to service after her salvage, sailing for more than a decade before being deliberately wrecked for insurance fraud. A tawdry end for a vessel that once carried one of the sea's most enduring mysteries. And while the Atlantic held its secrets in rolling blue, in drawing rooms far from the creak of masts and the sting of salt spray, another world existed entirely, a world of polished floors, silver tea services, and the genteel pursuits of those who profited from ships like these without ever setting foot upon them. Far from the icy seas and salt-stained decks, life for a 19th century shipping magnate's family unfolded in a rhythm of comfort, ceremony, and calculated social maneuvering. Their homes, often grand seaside residences or imposing townhouses, stood as architectural announcements of prosperity. Tall sash windows admitted light into drawing rooms, where polished mahogany gleamed and thick carpets muffled every step. The faint aroma of beeswax polish mingled with that of fresh-cut flowers, arranged daily by household staff. Imagine yourself in such a place. The walls are hung with maritime paintings, sleek ships under full sail, captured in oil and gilt frames, reminders of the industry that funded every indulgence. Alongside them sit portraits of forebears in stiff collars, gazing solemnly as if to guard the family's reputation. Mornings might begin with breakfast in a sunlit room overlooking the garden or the shore. The table would be laid with fine porcelain, silver cutlery, and linens so crisp they rustled at the touch. Tea from distant plantations, sugar from the Caribbean, bread baked that morning in the kitchen ovens. All these were the quiet fruits of a global trade system in which the family's ships played a vital role. For the ladies of the household, the day's duties revolved around social calls, correspondence, and charitable work, activities that reinforced their standing within the local community. Visiting a neighboring estate for tea, attending a church committee meeting, or hosting an afternoon gathering might fill the hours before dusk. The men of the family, particularly the patriarch, oversaw business from a well-appointed study or from offices near the docks. Letters and telegrams arrived with news of cargoes, markets, and ship positions. In winter, there might be reports of a vessel delayed by storms in the Atlantic. In summer, news of brisk trade from the Mediterranean or the Orient. Such information dictated the family's fortunes, yet the details of risk and hardship remained firmly at a distance. Evenings often brought gatherings in the drawing room, with the soft strains of piano music or the measured voices of conversation. A dinner party, perhaps, with candlelight reflecting off crystal and polished silver. Guests might speak of politics, literature, or the latest technological innovations. Steam power, iron hulls, that promised to transform shipping and commerce. Behind the elegance was a network of dependents. Servants, from the butler who managed the household to the stable hands who cared for carriage horses, worked largely unseen, ensuring that life for the family flowed without interruption. Few in the household gave much thought to the crews laboring in distant seas, their work enabling this very comfort. As the fire and the grate dimmed and lamps were turned down, the quiet of such a home stood in striking contrast to the relentless motion of the ocean. Ships carried cargo through night and storm, but here, in the magnate's residence, the only sounds were the ticking of a clock and the gentle sigh of wind at the windows. And so we closed this voyage, from the icy, perilous decks of whaling ships, through tales of tragedy and mystery, to the polished calm of the drawing room. In the span of an evening, the world has shifted from raw endurance to refined ease, a reminder of the vast distances, not just in miles, but in lived experience, that separated those who built their lives upon the sea. Settle in, and let your thoughts drift far back through the centuries, to a time when the Eastern Roman Empire, what we often call the Byzantine Empire, stood as a glittering bastion between worlds. Its capital, Constantinople, rose from the shores of the Bosphorus, like a crown of stone and gold. The city's massive walls caught the morning light, and the sea at their base carried both riches and dangers from distant lands. Behind those walls, life could be as refined as the polished marble of its palaces. Yet, when enemy armies appeared on the horizon, all that splendor became a fortress under strain. For the people within, a siege was not merely a battle fought at the gates, it was a long, grinding trial that tested bodies, minds, and faith. Outside, the smoke of campfires and siege engines clouded the sky. Inside, the streets grew quieter, the markets thinner, the air more tense with each passing day. In this journey, we will move slowly through for moments in Byzantine history, beginning with the weary days of an ordinary citizen under siege, then walking beside the towering figure of Emperor Justinian I, whose reign reshaped the empire. We will wander into the great Hagia Sophia, not to marvel only at its domes and mosaics, but to find the hidden marks left by centuries of hands. And finally, we will step into the candlelit halls of the imperial court, where golden dishes and soft music masked an intricate dance of power. So, close your eyes if you wish, and let the steady pace of the past lead you. There is no rush here, only the measured passing of time, like the slow turning of a great city's gates. Imagine yourself standing in a narrow street of Constantinople. The stone walls on either side rise high, their windows shuttered. Overhead, the winter sky is pale and without warmth. You pull your cloak tighter, though the wool is thin. Somewhere in the distance, beyond the walls, comes a dull thud, another stone launched by an enemy engine, striking the outer defenses. The sound is no longer startling. It has become part of the rhythm of your days. Life under siege is a slow, tightening circle. At first, when word spreads that enemy forces have encamped outside the city, there is a surge of preparation. Gates are reinforced, wells checked, food stores counted. The markets still operate, though prices begin to creep upward. But as the days stretch into weeks, and the weeks into months, the city changes. Fresh produce disappears first, then dried fruits, then even the less favored grains. Bread becomes smaller, coarser, and more precious. Hunger sharpens the senses, yet dulls the spirit. The smell of baking bread from the imperial storehouses is a torment to those who queue for their ration of millet gruel. Children grow quiet, their energy spent more in sleeping than in play. Illness finds its way into the city, carried not by invaders but by the crowded quarters and dwindling hygiene. Coughs echo through alleys, fevers rise, and the once bustling bathhouses close, their water better saved for drinking. Night brings little relief. The watchmen along the Theodosian walls keep their vigil, torches flickering in the wind. From the towers, one can see the enemy fires glowing like a chain of stars around the city. Sometimes, shouts carry across the darkness, mocking calls from soldiers who know they have time on their side. Inside the walls, the fear is quieter, but no less present. Families huddle together, speaking in low voices, listening for the creak of gates or the crash of a breach. And always there is the smoke. The besiegers burn what they can trees for their engines. Buildings in nearby villages even refuse to create a haze that drifts into the city. The smell is a mix of scorched wood, damp earth, and something less distinct but heavier. The scent of confinement, of too many people breathing the same stale air. Days are measured not by the sun's movement, but by the cycle of bells and horns. The call to the walls, the outclear, the change of the watch. For the average citizen, survival means endurance, finding a way to stretch food, to keep warm, to avoid illness. Rumors fill the spaces where news is scarce. Some say relief forces are on the way, others whisper of surrender. Each morning, you wake to find the city still holding, and the siege still pressing. Weeks later, when the end finally comes, whether through victory, negotiation, or disaster, it is almost a shock. The streets fill again with voices, though many are weaker now. The gates open, and fresh air moves through the city. But the memory of those long, hungry days lingers in every household, a reminder of the thin line between safety and hardship in a city that, for all its grandeur, was never entirely beyond reach. If you leave behind the crowded streets of a city under siege and step into the vast halls of imperial power, the pace of life changes, but only in appearance. Behind the gilded mosaics and measured ceremonies, the Byzantine court was as relentless in its demands as any battlefield, and few figures embodied the ceaseless energy of imperial ambition, more than Emperor Justinian I. Born around the year 482 in the small village of Taurasium, likely in the Balkans, Justinian's beginnings were far from imperial. His uncle, Justin, served in the imperial guard, and through skill, fortune, and loyal service, rose to the throne. It was under his uncle's patronage that Justinian entered the court, receiving an education in law, theology, and administration that would shape his reign. Imagine him in his early years at court, meticulous, observant, with an appetite for detail. His manner was not one of idle grandeur, but of a man constantly engaged with the machinery of governance. In 527, he succeeded his uncle as emperor, and from that point onward, his vision for the empire took on a scale that was as bold as it was exhausting. One of Justinian's greatest legacies lay in law. His corpus juris civilis, or body of civil law, was a vast reorganization and codification of centuries of Roman legal material. Before this, laws were scattered across decrees, precedents, and interpretations, a patchwork that made consistent justice difficult. Under Justinian's direction, jurists sifted through these tangled threads, discarding outdated provisions and refining others until they produced a clear, structured legal code. This work would echo far beyond his reign, influencing legal thought across Europe for centuries. Yet Justinian's ambition was not confined to scrolls and courtrooms. He dreamed of restoring the empire's former territorial glory. His generals, most notably Belisarius and Narses, were dispatched to reclaim lands once under Roman rule, Africa from the Vandals, Italy from the Ostrogoths, and parts of southern Spain. These campaigns brought both triumphs and strains, expanding the empire's reach, but stretching its resources thin. The emperor's hand can also be seen in stone and mortar. The most famous example is the Hagia Sophia, rebuilt after riots in 532 destroyed the earlier structure. In the wake of the Nicareae, violent upheaval in Constantinople that left much of the city damaged, Justinian's rebuilding efforts were both practical and symbolic. The new Hagia Sophia, with its soaring dome that seems to float above a halo of light, was a statement of imperial resilience and divine favor. It was said that upon seeing it completed, Justinian declared, "Solomon, I have surpassed thee." But Justinian's reign was shadowed by challenges that no ambition could entirely overcome. The Justinianic plague, beginning around 541, swept through the empire, taking countless lives and leaving cities quiet and half-empty. The emperor himself fell ill, though he recovered. The economy wavered under the weight of war, rebuilding, and disease. And though his laws and buildings would endure, his territorial gains would begin to erode even within his lifetime. His wife, Empress Theodora, was a constant presence in his rule, intelligent, politically astute, and unafraid to challenge him. Together, they navigated crises with a mix of pragmatism and stubborn resolve. Theodora's counsel during the Nika riots is often remembered, when some urged Justinian to flee. She is said to have told him that royal purple makes a fine burial shroud, urging him to stand his ground. By the time of his death in 565, Justinian had reshaped the empire in ways that would be felt for generations. His vision was vast, his methods often exacting, and his reign a blend of triumph and strain. To walk through the remnants of his Constantinople is to feel his imprint still in the laws that guided later rulers, in the stones of the Hagia Sophia, and in the enduring image of a ruler who refused to think small. If you stand in the Hagia Sophia today, the air feels still, even though thousands of footsteps echo across its marble floors. The dome hangs above you, suspended like a second sky, its golden mosaics catching light that filters in through narrow windows. Yet for all its grandeur, much of its life is found in the small, almost secret things, the marks left by hands across more than 1,000 years. Construction of this basilica began in 532 under Justinian, rising quickly from the ruins of its predecessor. The architects Anthemius of Tralles and Isidore of Miletus designed it with ambition that was both technical and symbolic. But what history often overlooks are the countless artisans, laborers, and apprentices who moved through the building during and after its creation. Their presence is quietly recorded in the stone itself. Look closely at some of the marble railings and columns, and you might notice faint carvings graffiti, though of a very different kind than one finds in modern cities. Some are names scratched in Greek or Latin letters, perhaps by a worker proud to leave his mark on a sacred space. Others are simple geometric patterns, spirals or crochet arches, made absent-mindedly by someone waiting for instructions or resting between tasks. One of the most curious inscriptions is thought to be in runes Old Norse script. It is faint, carved into a balustrade on the upper gallery. Scholars believe it was left by a member of the Varangian Guard, the elite bodyguards of the Byzantine emperors, many of whom came from Scandinavia. The idea that a Norseman, far from home, stood here centuries ago and left his name as a reminder that Constantinople was a meeting place of worlds. There are other, more subtle signs of human touch. In certain corners, the marble floors bear shallow depressions, worn smooth over centuries by the shuffling of countless feet, pilgrims, clergy, and visitors passing in steady rhythms. Near the great doors, the bronze handles have been polished by the hands of thousands, their patina shaped by human contact more than by time. Some marks were more deliberate. In the apse and side aisles, faint outlines suggest where earlier mosaics once stood before later coverings were applied. Layers of paint, plaster, and tile tell the building's shifting identity from church to mosque to museum, and now once more a mosque. In quiet moments, restorers have uncovered floral patterns or fragments of saints' faces, preserved by accident in the dim space behind more recent walls. Then there are the wishing columns, places where visitors for centuries have pressed fingers into small holes in the stone, turning them in hopes of receiving blessings. These worn spots are neither official decoration nor structural necessity, but they have become part of the Hagia Sophia's living fabric, a sign of how people shape buildings with beliefs as much as with tools. The marks are not always visible to the casual glance. They hide in corners, along railings, and beneath layers of history. To notice them, you must slow your pace, letting your eyes adjust to the changes in light and texture. You might trace a fingertip over a shallow carved line, feeling the difference between worked stone and the smoother surfaces beside it. In those moments, the noise of the centuries seems to fade, and the building itself becomes a quiet ledger of human presence. These small details do not make the history books in bold headlines. They are not great battles, nor royal decrees, nor architectural triumphs, but they are the kind of history that lives in the margins, in the unnoticed corners, waiting for someone to look closely. And in that way, they carry a certain intimacy and unbroken thread from the present moment to the touch of someone who stood there long before you. If life under siege was measured in hunger and rationing, the great imperial banquets of Constantinople were measured in excess and display. Within the thick walls of the great palace, the Byzantine emperors presided over gatherings designed as much to impress and intimidate as to feed. These meals were not hurried affairs. They were slow, deliberate, carefully staged performances in which every movement, every serving dish, and every musical note had its place. Imagine walking through the palace corridors toward the banquet hall. The marble underfoot is cool and polished, laid in intricate patterns of porphyry, onyx, and alabaster. Lamps of hammered bronze lined the way, their light warm but steady, flickering gently against gilded surfaces. You pass through great doors inlaid with ivory and gold leaf, stepping into a room that glows as if lit from within. The emperor sits at the center, elevated slightly above his guests. His robes are heavy with gold thread, catching the lamplight with every small movement. Around him, courtiers and foreign envoys take their places according to an exact order of precedence. For here, seating is not a matter of convenience, but a reflection of hierarchy. A misplaced guest could signal insult. A place too near the emperor could be read as dangerous favor. The food arrives in stages, borne on silver and gilt platters by servants in tunics of deep blue and crimson. These attendants move with quiet precision, each one trained to approach from a certain side, to bow at a certain angle, and to withdraw without a sound. The scents that drift through the hall are subtle but rich: roasted lamb rubbed with herbs, delicate pastries layered with honey, fish dressed with oil and vinegar, bowls of olives and figs, and breads of varying shapes and textures, some plain, some flecked with sesame. Between courses, musicians play from a raised gallery. The sounds of lyres, flutes, and soft percussion mingle with the low hum of conversation. The music is not meant to demand attention, but to provide a constant, dignified backdrop, as steady and deliberate as the movement of the servers. Drinks are poured with similar ceremony. Golden cups and cut crystal goblets are filled with wine from the vineyards of Thrace or the Aegean Islands, sometimes sweetened or infused with spices brought by traders from far beyond the empire's borders. Water is served, too, in vessels of polished brass or plain ceramic, for even the simplest refreshment is here treated with formality. Such a banquet is not merely about the act of eating. It is a political theater in which the emperor demonstrates wealth, control, and divine favor. The abundance of food speaks to the empire's reach, bringing together ingredients from across its vast territories. The choreography of the evening, from the opening toast to the final plate, reinforces the stability and order that the emperor wishes to project. And yet, beyond the splendor, there is a quiet rhythm to it all. The slow arrival of each course, the measured tone of conversation, broken only by soft laughter or the clink of utensils, the music rising and falling like a tide. The banquet is not rushed. It unfolds like a long, deliberate procession, with time to notice the gleam of the plates, the weave of the tablecloths, and the way candlelight dances along the walls. When the final dishes have been cleared, perhaps fresh fruit, perhaps sugared almonds, the guests remain for a time, speaking in low tones, exchanging subtle nods and glances that carry meanings beyond the reach of casual observation. Only when the emperor chooses to rise does the evening come to its close. One by one, the guests are led away, each departure as carefully orchestrated as their arrival. Beyond the hall, the city sleeps under the same moon that once shone over sieges, markets, and quiet chapels. Inside, the echo of the banquet lingers, a memory of gold, of music, of the slow turning of the Byzantine court's great wheel. Settle yourself in a comfortable position. Let the present moment quieten as we turn our attention to another time, another world entirely. Tonight, we will walk slowly, unhurriedly, through the dusty streets and cold streams of the gold rush era. You may already imagine the images that history has left us, men crouched by riverbanks, tin pans in hand, faces shaded by broad-brimmed hats. But the reality, as with so much of the past, was far less glamorous than the stories suggest. Our journey will take us through 4 scenes. First, we will spend some time in the life of a miner, living and working in the relentless, exhausting rhythm of a gold rush camp. Then, we will follow the rise and fall of Levi Strauss, whose name became forever linked with the fabric of denim, but whose beginnings were in the crowded streets of San Francisco. From there, we will turn toward the enduring legend of the Lost Dutchman's Mine, a story woven into the desert itself. And at last, we will step inside the parlors and dining rooms of San Francisco's wealthiest citizens, whose lives were as removed from the miner's hardship as one could imagine. For now, let your mind's eye drift to the edges of the 19th century frontier. The goldfields stretch before you, a mix of riverbanks, rocky gullies, and makeshift shanties. The air is filled with the sound of moving water, the occasional call from camp to camp, and the steady rhythm of tools striking stone. Here is where our journey begins. Imagine waking in the pale light of dawn in a rough canvas tent that sags slightly under the weight of morning dew. The night has been cold, as nights in the mountains or along the rivers often are, and the wool blanket you've been sleeping under still carries the chill of damp air. Your bed is not a bed at all, but a simple roll laid over the uneven ground, where you can feel every stone and root beneath you. The day begins without ceremony. There is no lingering over breakfast, no comfortable pause before work. If you have food at hand, perhaps a tin of coffee grounds, hard biscuits, or a strip of salted pork is quickly prepared over a small fire. The smoke curls into the still air, carrying the faint smell of charred wood and meat. Supplies are never certain here. What you have depends on what you brought, what you can buy at inflated camp prices, or what you are lucky enough to trade from another prospector. By the time the sun has lifted above the hills, you are already at the water's edge. The work is deceptively simple in description, scooping up gravel and sediment from the river, swishing it in a pan, letting the lighter material wash away, and always hoping that a few glints of gold will remain at the bottom. In reality, it is a strain on the body. The cold water seeps through your boots and numbs your feet. The constant stooping leaves your back aching. The repetitive swirl of the pan stiffens your shoulders and arms. The river is never quiet. There is the rush of water over stones, the creak of shifting timber from makeshift sluices, and the occasional muttered word from nearby miners. Conversations are brief and guarded. In this place, trust is rare, and the fear of claim jumpers, men who might try to steal your spot, keeps everyone slightly on edge. Midday comes without much change. You might pause for a bite of whatever food you've brought in your pocket, bread gone stale, or beans cold from the morning's fire, but there is no proper meal. Time spent eating is time not working, and every hour at the river could mean the difference between a few flecks of gold and none at all. The dangers are not only in the work itself. The water is cold enough to sap your strength if you stand in it too long, and sudden rains upstream can swell the current without warning. In camp, disease spreads easily. Poor sanitation, unclean water, and the closeness of so many people in small quarters make illness almost inevitable. And there is the ever-present risk of theft, or worse, from those who find desperation outweighs the risk of punishment. As the sun begins to dip, your body is heavy with fatigue. The tools pick pan, chevalar, heavier still after a long day's use. If you are lucky, you return to camp with a small pouch of dust or flakes, their combined weight far less than you had hoped for. If you are unlucky, your pockets are empty, and the day has given you only sore muscles and chapped hands. Evening in camp is a subdued affair. Fires burn low, casting flickering light on rough faces. The talk is sparse, often revolving around prices in town. Rumors of richer finds are prefer. or the stories of men who struck it big always told in a way that makes it seem possible, just possible, that tomorrow might be different. But most know that the chances are slim, and the life they lead is not a brief stop on the way to fortune, but a long, grinding existence. You settle into your tent once again, the same blanket, the same uneven ground, the same cold air creeping in. Sleep comes slowly, not because of excitement for what the next day will bring, but because of the ache in your muscles and the uncertainty of whether your efforts will ever be rewarded. Picture, if you will, a harbor bustling with ships in the mid-19th century. The air is rich with the scent of salt and tar, the creak of rigging, and the distant shouts of dockworkers. In this setting, a young man named Loeb Strauss, who would come to be known to the world as Levi Strauss, arrives in the city of San Francisco. He was born in Bavaria in 1829, the youngest son in a Jewish family of peddlers. His father died when he was just a child, and soon after, he and his mother made the long voyage to the United States. They settled first in New York, where his older brothers had already begun a dry goods business selling cloth, clothing, and sewing supplies to the growing population of the city. In 1853, hearing of the opportunities in the West brought by the gold rush, Levi set his course for California. It was not the gold itself he sought, but the needs of the men who were searching for it. Miners required sturdy clothing, tools, blankets, and tents, and Levi saw that supplying these goods could be just as profitable, perhaps more so than hunting for gold in the cold rivers. San Francisco at the time was a city in transition, growing rapidly, noisy with construction, and crowded with hopeful arrivals. Streets were dusty in summer, muddy in winter, and always filled with the clang of hammers and the rumble of carts. Levi set up shop as a wholesaler of dry goods, operating out of a modest storefront, but stocking a wide variety of items imported from the East. It was in this environment that a problem began to present itself to Levi and an opportunity. Miners and laborers often complained that their trousers wore out quickly under the strain of work. Fabric tore easily, seams frayed, and pockets gave way under the weight of carried tools. Levi began selling trousers made from sturdy canvas, intended at first for tents, and later from a heavy cotton fabric known as denim. They were practical garments, plain, functional, and able to withstand the rigors of mining camps and shipyards alike. The real innovation, however, came in partnership with a tailor named Jacob Davis. Davis had the idea to reinforce the weakest points of trousers, the pockets and the base of the fly, with small copper rivets. The design proved to be remarkably durable, and in 1873, Levi Strauss and Jacob Davis received a patent for these riveted denim pants. They would, over time, become known simply as Levi's. The years that followed were prosperous for Levi. His business expanded, and the name became known not just in California, but across the country. The trousers were worn by miners, ranchers, railroad workers, anyone who needed clothing that could endure long hours and hard labor. Levi himself became a respected figure in San Francisco, known for his philanthropy as well as his business success. He supported orphanages, funded scholarships, and was active in civic life. Yet, as with all enterprises, there were challenges. The boom years of the gold rush faded. The city faced economic downturns, fires, and epidemics. Competition in the clothing market grew, and other manufacturers began producing similar trousers once the rivet patent expired. Levi's company survived these changes through careful management and a reputation for quality, but the easy profits of the early years were gone. Levi Strauss never married and had no children. When he died in 1902, he left his fortune to his nephews and to various charitable causes. The company he founded continued on, its products becoming a symbol far beyond the world he knew, worn by farmers and factory workers, but also by musicians, actors, and, eventually, people in cities around the globe. Yet behind the brand's later fame was the quiet, methodical work of a man who saw opportunity in supplying the needs of others, and who built his life's success not from the glitter of gold, but from the sturdy threads of cloth, from the noise of San Francisco's wharves and the hum of sewing machines. Our journey will now shift far from the city into the open, sun-baked wilderness of the American Southwest, where stories of hidden gold have persisted for generations. Imagine, if you will, a stretch of desert that seems to go on forever, its surface broken by jagged ridges of rock, sparse tufts of cactus, and the occasional bleached fragment of wood, once part of a fence or wagon long gone. This is the landscape of the Superstition Mountains in Arizona, a place where silence is as much a part of the environment as the wind or the sun. The light here is unrelenting by day, golden and soft, at dawn and dusk, and at night, the stars feel so near you might almost reach for them. It is here that a legend has persisted for well over a century, the story of a hidden gold mine, known as the Lost Dutchman's Mine. The Dutchman in the story was not, in fact, Dutch, but German Jacob Waltz, an immigrant who came to the United States in the mid-19th century. His life before Arizona is only partly known. He worked as a prospector and miner, and like many in his time, moved frequently in search of opportunity. The tale begins, as so many legends do, with a claim of a remarkable discovery. Jacob Waltz was said to have found a vein of gold somewhere in the Superstition Mountains, a deposit so rich that the gold could be gathered by the handful. Some versions of the story say he found it by accident, others that he was told of its location by someone who knew the land well. In either case, Waltz is believed to have kept the location a closely guarded secret. For years, he would occasionally arrive in town with gold of unusual purity. He sold it sparingly, never in such quantities as to draw too much attention, but enough to support himself. He lived quietly, and those who knew him often described him as reserved, perhaps even cautious. It is said he never trusted maps, and if he left any clues at all, they were given in vague hints or cryptic remarks. In 1891, Jacob Waltz fell ill, as he lay dying in the home of a woman named Julia Thomas in Phoenix. He is believed to have revealed some details of the mine's location. Julia, along with a few others, attempted to find it after his death, but the directions were incomplete or misunderstood. They returned empty-handed, but the story of the mine had begun to spread. Over the decades that followed, many tried their luck in the Superstition Mountains, some disappearing entirely, others returning with nothing but sunburn and a deeper respect for the desert's harshness. The area's reputation grew rugged, remote, and prone to sudden storms or flash floods. Some searchers claimed to have found traces of worked rock or old tools, only to lose the trail again. Others told of strange markings on stones, of landmarks that matched pieces of the legend, but never quite enough to confirm the mine's existence. The desert itself has a way of keeping secrets. Trails vanish in shifting sands. Seasonal washes carve new paths through gullies, altering the land's appearance. In such an environment, even a well-marked location could be hidden for generations. And so the legend endures, sustained by the tantalizing possibility that somewhere, beneath the layers of rock and time, lies a fortune untouched. Today, the Lost Dutchman's Mine is as much a part of Arizona folklore as any historical event. Some believe it never existed at all, that Jacob Waltz's gold came from theft or from a mine long since exhausted. Others are convinced that treasure remains, waiting for the right combination of luck, skill, and persistence to bring it to light. But whether the mine is real or imagined, the story has outlasted the man, the miners, and even the towns that once supplied them. And now, as we leave behind the quiet mystery of the desert, we return to the growing city by the bay in 1850, where those who had succeeded in the gold rush, or simply profited from it, built lives of extraordinary comfort. Imagine stepping off a dusty street in San Francisco in the middle of the gold rush and into the polished, echoing foyer of a tycoon's mansion. Outside, the air is thick with the scent of salt from the bay, mingled with the more pungent smells of horses, tar, and the open drains of a city still growing faster than it can manage. Inside, however, there is a different world entirely. The floor beneath your feet is of polished wood, possibly oak imported at great expense. A long, narrow runner of woven wool, dyed in deep reds and blues, stretches down the hallway. The walls are lined with paneling, some of it carved by local craftsmen, some shipped in from far-off ports. The space feels cooler than the streets outside, shaded by heavy curtains that keep the strong sunlight at bay. In 1850, San Francisco's wealthiest residents often had fortunes made not by finding gold themselves, but by selling goods, financing operations, or owning ships that ferried miners and supplies between the city and distant harbors. These were merchants, bankers, and investors, men and women, who understood that during a gold rush, the surest wealth often came from meeting other people's needs. Their homes reflected that prosperity. In the drawing room, a polished piano might stand beneath a framed painting of the Sierra Nevada mountains, the same mountains from which the city's gold came. On a nearby table, A decanter of brandy from France sits beside glasses of thin, delicate crystal. Fresh flowers, perhaps roses or lily, are arranged in a ceramic vase from China, their fragrance filling the air. Meals in such a household were elaborate affairs. Servants, often drawn from the growing immigrant communities in the city, prepared dishes that combined the flavors of several continents. A dinner might begin with oysters fresh from the bay, followed by roasted meats, accompanied by vegetables and bread. Wines from Europe or South America filled the glasses, and for dessert, there might be imported fruits preserved in syrup or chocolate from Mexico. The life of a tycoon in San Francisco was also a social performance. Invitations to dine, attend a ball, or join a private club were as much about status as they were about leisure. These gatherings were opportunities to make deals, form alliances, and subtly display one's success. A woman's gown might be made of silk ordered from Canton, trimmed with lace from France. A man's waistcoat could be cut from fine English wool, the buttons gleaming with mother. But behind the elegance was a city still finding its shape. The streets outside these mansions were uneven, sometimes churned into mud in the rainy season, or layered with fine dust in the summer. The waterfront was a mix of newly built warehouses, half-finished piers, and abandoned ships, some left by crews who had rushed inland in search of their own fortune. Even the wealthiest households were not immune to the uncertainty of the age. Fortunes could rise or fall with the value of gold, the outcome of a shipment, or the shifting tides of investment. Still, for those at the top, the gold rush years were a time of unmatched opportunity. From the windows of their homes, these tycoons could look out over the bay at ships from every corner of the world, knowing that their wealth was tied not just to the gold in the hills, but to the constant movement of people, goods, and ideas. And so we end our journey through the dusty riverbanks, the miners' hardships, the whispered legends of lost treasure, and the quiet opulence of San Francisco's elite. As you drift into rest, imagine the distant clink of glasses, the faint hum of a piano, and the steady, unhurried rhythm of a city built on both dreams and determination. Settle into your seat, or into your bed. Let the day's noise drift away as we step gently into a world of a century ago, a world where the earth itself became both shield and prison. Tonight, our path will wind through the sodden, narrow lanes of the First World War trenches. We will not rush. We will linger in the details, noticing the slow rhythm of days that blurred into weeks, and weeks into months. The Great War is often remembered for its battles, those brief, violent bursts that fill the history books. But for most soldiers, the war was not fought in constant action. It was endured, in the long, unmoving front lines. Men lived in an environment that was as much mud and monotony as it was danger and destruction. Over the course of this journey, we will explore the realities of trench life, meet individuals who shaped the war's human story, and wander into the legends that flickered like ghostly lights in the minds of those who served. And, finally, we will step into the world far behind the front, the quiet, calculated rooms where decisions were made, far from the mud. For now, breathe slowly, and picture a long earthen wall stretching across a barren field. The air is damp, the light is grey. Somewhere, a slow drip of water echoes in a narrow dugout. You are standing at the edge of the First World War. Imagine descending a short, crude ladder into a slit in the earth, the walls reinforced with rough timbers and sandbags. The smell hits you first, damp soil, mingled with the sour scent of unwashed bodies and the faint tang of gun oil. Over time, this smell will settle into your clothes, your skin, your hair. It becomes the background scent of your life. The ground underfoot is never quite dry. In the cold months, water collects in the bottom of the trench until it is ankle deep, sometimes higher. Your boots stand at issue, heavy and stiff, quickly become soaked. After hours of standing in icy water, the skin on your feet begins to swell and pale, a condition known as trench foot. In the summer, the mud bakes and cracks, only to turn to sticky sludge again at the next rain. The walls are close on either side. You cannot stand fully upright without risking a glance over the parapet, where enemy eyes and rifles are always searching. Above, wooden duckboards line sections of the trench floor, but they are slick and uneven. Rats thrive here, feeding on food scraps and, more grimly, on the bodies of the fallen. They grow large unnervingly, large, feeding on a diet richer than they would ever find in fields or cellars. Lice, too, are constant companions. No matter how carefully you try to keep your uniform clean, They find their way into the seams, the folds, the very weave of the cloth. Their bites leave you itching under layers of wool, even in your sleep, which is rarely deep or uninterrupted. And then there is the noise, or sometimes the silence. Shellfire may come in sudden bursts, pounding the earth until the air vibrates in your chest. Machine guns chatter briefly in the distance. At other times, the front is eerily still, broken only by the faint rustle of wind through the sandbags or the plop of water from a leaking wall. It is in those quiet stretches that your mind begins to drift to home, to food, to the comfort of a dry bed. Danger is constant, but it is not always immediate. You may go days without an attack, yet never be free from the awareness that death could come at any moment, by bullet, by shell fragment, or by the creeping green cloud of gas drifting silently across no man's land. Gas masks hang at the ready, a heavy, rubbery reassurance that is also a reminder of what might come. Meals are basic and repetitive: tinned meat, hard biscuits, tea when there is time and fuel to boil water. Fresh food is rare. Cigarettes and letters from home are treasured. Small comforts that bring a flicker of normality to an otherwise unchanging routine. This is the rhythm of trench life. Stand to at dawn, scanning the mist for movement, repair work on the walls, carrying messages along the winding communication trenches, the occasional relief when your unit is rotated back from the front line, but always the knowledge that you will return. The war moves slowly here. The mud, the water, the rats, they do not move at all. In such conditions, camaraderie becomes survival. The men beside you share the same misery, and in that shared experience there is a quiet strength. You learn to laugh at small absurdities: a boot stuck fast in mud, a rat stealing a biscuit because laughter, even brief, breaks the monotony. As you stand in the dim light of the trench, shoulders hunched against the chill, you hear a low voice calling down the line. Orders, perhaps, or just a remark about the weather. Life here is measured, not in victories or defeats, but in hours endured. And from these sodden, narrow corridors of earth, our journey will next take us to the story of one person who, though far from the front line, met the war's cruelty with steadfast courage. Imagine a quiet street in Brussels in the year 1914. The city has already fallen under German occupation, and the bustle of normal life has shifted into something more subdued, more cautious. Soldiers stand at street corners, posters in German line the walls, and in a modest building on Rue de la Culture, a nurse walks the halls of a hospital she has run for years. Her name is Edith Cavell. She was born in the English county of Norfolk in 1865, the daughter of a vicar. Her early years were spent in the countryside green fields, narrow lanes, and the slow pace of a rural parish. But she trained as a nurse in her 30s, travelling first to London and then to Brussels, where she took charge of a nursing school and clinic. By the summer of 1914, she was well known in the city's medical circles, respected for her skill and her quiet, precise way of running the wards. When war came, her life changed overnight. The German army advanced quickly into Belgium, and Brussels fell. Many foreign nationals fled, but Edith stayed. To her, the duty of care did not end with the arrival of enemy soldiers. Wounded Benjamin, Belgian, British, French were all treated in her wards. The crisp white uniforms of her nurses moved between beds, tending to injuries without discrimination. But the war outside the hospital walls was not so impartial. For soldiers of the Allied forces, captured by the Germans meant imprisonment, often far from home. Some tried to slip through occupied territory to reach the neutral Netherlands, and quietly, without any official sanction, Edith Cavell began to help them. It was a dangerous thing to do. Assisting enemy soldiers to escape was punishable by death under German military law. Yet she continued, working with a network of Belgian patriots who forged documents, guided men along hidden routes, and found them safe passage across the border. She did not seek recognition. She kept no record of her efforts. To her, these were simply acts of humanity. But in the occupied city, whispers traveled quickly. German authorities began to suspect the existence of an escape network. In the summer of 1915, the net closed in. Edith was arrested, taken from her clinic, and held in St. Gilla prison. Interrogations followed. She admitted to helping about 200 men escape, making no attempt to deny her actions. Her trial was swift. The sentence, death by firing squad, was pronounced in early October. Appeals for mercy came from neutral nations, from diplomats, from the International Red Cross, but the military governor was unmoved. On the night of October 11th, she was allowed a final meeting with the Anglican chaplain, Reverend Sterling Gahon. She spoke calmly, expressing no bitterness. Her words that night would be remembered. Patriotism is not enough. I must have no hatred or bitterness towards anyone. The next morning, October 12th, she was led out into the dawn. It was quiet, the air was cold, and then it was done. News of her execution spread quickly through the Allied world. In Britain, her name became a rallying cry, her image appearing on posters and in newspapers. But Edith herself had never sought to be a symbol. She had been, above all, a nurse, one who believed that duty to the sick and suffering transcended the divisions of war. Today, her grave in Norwich is marked by a simple stone, and the hospital in Brussels still remembers her as its founder. The streets she walked are quieter now. The war long ended, but in that city, as in the wider world, her story endures not in shouts and banners, but in the quiet persistence of compassion in a time of cruelty. From the calm corridors of her clinic, we now turn to a different kind of story, one less certain, born not of recorded fact, but of whispered legend. It is August of 1914. The war is still young. Britain has only just entered the conflict, and the first troops of the British Expeditionary Force have crossed into Belgium to meet the advancing German army. The town of Mons is small, its cobbled streets lined with modest houses, a church steeple rising above the rooftops. On the outskirts, quiet fields ripple with late summer grain. But on the morning of the 23rd, the sound of marching boots and the distant rumble of artillery signaled the arrival of something far greater than the town has ever seen. The British soldiers who stood their ground at Mons were outnumbered. Their orders were to delay the German advance, buying time for a retreat toward France. And so they did. Rifle fire cracked across the fields. The enemy pressed forward in wave after wave. By the end of the day, the British were falling back, the heat and dust of August giving way to the weary trudging of retreat. It is in the long hours that followed marching, fighting, retreating, that the legend was born. Some soldiers would later speak of a vision appearing in the midst of exhaustion and fear. It was said to take many forms. For some, it was a shining figure, robed in white, hovering over the road, as if to guide them onward. Others described ghostly archers, like those of medieval England, loosing invisible arrows into the advancing enemy, and some claimed to hear a voice, calm and steady, telling them to keep moving, that they would be safe. The newspapers at home were eager for such a tale. In the autumn of 1914, a short story called The Bowman by Arthur Mahane appeared in the Evening News. It described spectral archers, summoned by prayer, who came to the aid of the British. Though the story was fictional, many readers took it for truth. Letters arrived, recounting supposed first-hand accounts. The story spread quickly, each retelling adding new detail. Before long, the Angel of Mons was firmly planted in public imagination. The figure became a comforting image, an assurance that some greater power was watching over the soldiers in those early, uncertain days. Historians have long debated the origins of the tale. Was it a simple misunderstanding, Mahane's fiction mistaken for fact? Was it a case of soldiers misremembering moments of exhaustion and fear, their minds weaving protective visions in the midst of danger? Or could there have been, for those men, something unexplainably, brief glimmer of hope, in a world suddenly stripped of it? Whatever the truth, the Angel of Mons lingered in wartime folklore. In letters home, in quiet conversations in barracks, the image would reappear. For soldiers enduring the mud, the cold, and the waiting, the thought of unseen protection, whether divine or imagined, was a small comfort in an otherwise unyielding war. And so the legend endures, not as a record in official histories, but as a kind of shared dream, a whisper from the past that, in the darkest moments, even the weary might be guided onward. From the spectral roads of Mons, we turn now to a very different world, one far removed from the front lines, yet deeply connected to the decisions that shaped them. Far from the mud and noise of the front, there were places where the war was experienced through maps and conversations rather than rifles and trenches. A general's headquarters in the First World War was often set up in a large country house, a commandeered chateau, or sometimes a well-appointed town building. These were places chosen not only for their strategic location, close enough to the action to remain informed, but far enough to avoid direct shelling, but also for the space they offered. A headquarters was not just a single office, but a network of rooms and people. each dedicated to a particular part of the vast machinery of war. Imagine arriving at such a place in the early morning. The air is cool, the sky pale. Outside the main building, motorcars wait by the gravel drive. Messengers in uniform move briskly from doorway to vehicle, carrying satchels of papers sealed with wax. Inside, the smell is one of ink, paper, and polished wood. The first room you might enter is the map room, its walls lined with large, detailed maps of the Western Front. Colored pins mark troop positions, while small flags indicate areas of recent movement. The maps are updated constantly, sometimes several times a day, as fresh information arrives by telegraph or courier. At a heavy wooden table, staff officers bend over the maps. They speak quietly, pointing to features, rivers, railway lines, small villages whose names have suddenly become critical. There is a measured pace to their work. Even when urgent news arrives, the conversations remain steady, deliberate. Elsewhere in the headquarters, clerks sort through stacks of reports. Pages are stamped, copied, and filed. Orders drafted in careful handwriting are typed out for distribution to units in the field. Each message must be exact worded so that no instruction can be misunderstood when it reaches a regiment miles away. There is a dining room, too. Here, officers gather at appointed times, their uniforms neat, the table set with china plates and silver cutlery. Meals are simple by peacetime standards, but generous compared to the rations in the trenches. Fresh bread, butter, sometimes meat or fish brought from nearby towns. After eating, some linger over coffee, discussing the day's plans or news from home. In the evenings, the headquarters takes on a quieter air. Lamps cast pools of yellow light across the map tables. The sounds of boots on wooden floors are muffled. Outside, the night may be cold and still, or filled with the distant thud of artillery, faint reminders that, even here, the war is never far away. For the generals and their staff, life at headquarters was a constant balancing act. They were insulated from the physical hardships of the trenches, yet burdened with the weight of decisions that could alter the course of a battle or the lives of thousands. Their war was one of information, of calculation, of long hours spent turning reports and possibilities into orders that would ripple outward across the front. And while the soldiers in the mud might never see these rooms, the quiet work done here shaped every movement they made. From here, we leave the polished floors and map-lined walls of the headquarters, and slowly drift back into the present where the war is a memory and the silence is unbroken. Tonight, we will travel back, slowly and steadily, to the windswept shores of Iceland in the time of the Vikings. Not the blazing raids or the clang of swords, no. Tonight's journey will be quieter, steadier, and far more ordinary. It is a story of the long, cold months that defined life more than any single battle. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of a narrow fjord. The water is dark and still, broken only by the faint lapping of waves against the rocks. Behind you, low hills rise, their flanks covered in thin grass that fades into moss and stone. The air is sharp with salt from the sea and the faint scent of smoke from distant turf houses. This Iceland is not the lush farmland of more temperate lands. It is a place where every growing season is brief, every winter long, and where survival rests on careful preparation. Over the next hours, we will move through the rhythm of this life, beginning in the cold dark of the farmstead, pausing to meet figures of history and peering into the treasures they left behind. We will end, much later, at a warm fire in a chieftain's hall. But first, we settle into the dim, frostbitten world of a Viking farmer in the depths of an Icelandic winter. The year's work had ended months ago, yet the labor never truly stopped. The days now were short, perhaps only 4 hours of dim light, the sun never rising far above the horizon. The rest was night, long stretches of darkness broken only by the dull flicker of a fire in the hearth. Inside the turf house, the air was thick with the smell of dried fish, smoke, and the faint tang of sheep wool. These homes were built low to the ground, their walls made of layers of turf stacked over a wooden frame, their roofs sloping under the weight of snow. Outside, the wind could scream against the walls, but within, it was muffled, replaced by the steady pop of burning peat. The farmer's life in winter was not idle. Every morning, if one could call it morning when the sky was still black, chores began. Animals needed tending in their byres, their breath steaming in the cold air. Sheep, cattle, and horses were fed from hay, carefully stored during summer, every mouthful measured to last until the grass returned. Water had to be carried from streams kept open by breaking ice, or melted from snow in great pots over the fire. The diet was as stark as the land. Salted fish and dried lamb were the staples, pulled from storage barrels and softened in water before cooking. Occasionally, there was skyra, thick, tangy dairy product or bread, made from imported grain, a rare treat. Firewood was scarce. Peat and dried dung often served as fuel instead. The fire was never allowed to go out entirely, for relighting it from cold was a laborious task. Work in the winter was as much about maintenance as survival. Clothing was mended by lamplight, tools were repaired, wooden handles smoothed, iron edges sharpened, nets for fishing in the thawed months were patched. The weaving loom saw long hours of use, turning wool into new garments for the coming year. There were dangers too, even in such stillness. Illness could spread quickly in the confined space of the turf house. Injuries, even small ones, could linger for months without proper healing. And always, in the background, there was the fear of running short of hay, of food, of warmth. Yet there was also a rhythm here, an unspoken understanding of how to endure. Storytelling filled the evenings. Old sagas were recited, their verses known by heart. Children learned their family's lineage, the names of ships, the deeds of distant kin. It was a quiet life, but one that demanded constant watchfulness, patience, and a respect for the elements that gave no mercy. And so the winter passed slowly, but always moving forward. The dark would lift, eventually. The days would lengthen, the snow retreat. But until then, the Viking farmer's world was this: the dim glow of firelight on timber beams, the creak of the wind against turf walls, and the steady heartbeat of survival. If the Viking farmer's world was bounded by the low walls of his turf house and the sweep of the local fjord, Leif Erikson's world was much larger. Yet even his life began in much the same way, born into a landscape of wind, stone, and sea. Leif was the son of Eric the Red, the man credited with founding the first Norse settlements in Greenland. His family's fortunes were shaped by both opportunity and exile. Eric himself had been driven from Norway for manslaughter, then later from Iceland for similar reasons. Greenland was his answer, new place, raw and unclaimed, where he could build anew. Leif grew up in this frontier world. Imagine him as a boy on the rocky shores of Greenland, the air bright with salt spray, the horizon always lined with drifting ice. From his father and the other settlers, he would have learned the arts of sailing, how to read the wind by the curl of waves, how to navigate by the sun and stars, and how to keep a ship steady in a turbulent sea. By the year 1000, Leif was a young man, tall and broad-shouldered, with the quiet assurance of someone used to long voyages. His journeys took him first to Norway, where he met King Olaf Tryggvason. Here, in a land more wooded and populous than his own, Leif encountered new faith, the Christian religion, which he accepted and carried back to Greenland. But Leif's greatest journey would take him farther still. According to the sagas, a merchant had told him of a land to the west, glimpsed by another sailor, who had been blown off course. This land was said to have forests and pastures, treasures unknown in treeless Greenland. Leif gathered a crew and sailed toward it, steering by the sun in summer, the days long and bright. The journey was not swift. Ships then were open to the elements, their single square sails and oar banks offering both power and vulnerability. Nights were cold, the sea stretching in all directions, the only constant the creak of the hull and the smell of salt-soaked wood. But eventually, they saw it. A shoreline with tall trees, rivers, and a mild climate compared to Greenland. Leif called this place Vinland. He and his men built shelters and explored, finding grapes growing wild, salmon in the rivers, and meadows that seemed endless. The sagas suggest they stayed through a winter, though even here, in this gentler land, the cold was not absent. Eventually, they returned to Greenland with their tales, timber, and the promise of future settlement. Leif's later years were quieter. After his father's death, he became the leader of the Greenland colony. He is said to have kept order, maintained trade, and upheld both the Old Norse customs and the newer Christian practices. His life, then, bridged worlds between Iceland and Greenland, between old faith and new, and between the known seas and the western lands that would not be fully rediscovered for centuries. In the glow of the fire, his voyages became part of the oral tradition, his name carried on in the same verses that recounted the deeds of gods and kings. And in that way, even after the storms of his life had passed, Leif Erikson remained part of the long memory of the North. Imagine the gentle roll of a grassy mound in southern Norway. its surface dotted with wildflowers in summer, and crusted with frost in winter. Beneath it, for over 1,000 years, lay one of the most remarkable archaeological finds of the Viking Age. The Oseberg ship burial is not just a vessel, it is a window into the artistry, wealth, and ritual of a world long gone. Discovered in 1904, near the small village of Oseberg, the burial mound concealed a nearly intact ship. It was over 20 meters long, its prow and stern curling upward in elegant spirals, each curve carved with intricate designed serpents twisting in endless loops. Beasts with wide eyes, their forms blending into the wood. The craftsmanship was exquisite, far beyond the purely functional. The ship had been used not for travel, but as a grand chamber for the dead. Inside, archaeologists found the remains of 2 women, their bones fragile with age, their lives separated by more than a millennium from the world we know. One woman was likely in her 70s, the other perhaps in her 50s. Their identities remain uncertain, possibly noblewomen, priestesses, or figures of high spiritual importance. What is certain is that their burial was a display of extraordinary wealth and status. The grave goods filled the ship, finely woven tapestries with intricate patterns, wooden sledges carved with elaborate detail, beds with decorated posts, and chests containing everyday items as well as rare treasures. There were tools for weaving, suggesting the importance of textile production, and a cart with wooden panels etched in swirling designs. Even the smallest objects, buckets bound in bronze, small combs, showed care and artistry. There was also a feast's worth of offerings, remains of food, seeds, and even sacrificed animals, including horses. These were not placed carelessly, but arranged as part of a ritual to accompany the deceased into the next world. In Norse belief, the journey after death was not merely symbolic. It was prepared for as though the departed would need transport, clothing, and sustenance beyond the grave. The Oseberg find also offered a rare glimpse into Viking shipbuilding. The oak planks were fastened with iron rivets, overlapping in the clinker style that made the vessels light yet strong. Even without a sail, the shape alone suggested speed and grace upon the water. What makes the Oseberg burial especially intriguing is the mystery that still lingers. The 2 women's roles in their community are unknown, their relationship to each other unrecorded. Were they rulers in their own right, or part of a powerful household? Priestesses conducting sacred rites, or perhaps figures remembered in sagas, now lost to time? Today, the ship rests in the Viking Ship Museum in Oslo, its wood darkened with age, but its carvings still alive with detail. To stand before it is to feel the strange closeness of the past, its stories not fully told. Its face is unseen, but its presence undeniable. And so the Oseberg burial remains both a marvel of preservation and a whisper from another age, carrying with it the scent of oak, the shimmer of woven threads, and the slow dignity of a voyage meant for eternity. Picture a longhouse in the heart of winter, its roof low and turf-covered, protecting the warmth inside from the wind that howls across the Icelandic plain. The walls are lined with carved wooden beams, their surfaces darkened by smoke from the central hearth. It is here, on a night of significance perhaps, after a successful trading voyage or the settlement of a long dispute, that a Viking chieftain hosts his feast. The air is thick with the mingled scents of wood smoke and roasting meat. Long benches flank a sturdy table made from thick slabs of timber. At the head of the table sits the chieftain himself, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a cloak edged with fur. Beside him, important guests, neighboring leaders, traders, perhaps a poet whose verses will be recited before the night ends. The meal begins with mead, golden sweet and warm, from the cask poured into horn cups polished smooth by years of use. Alongside it, ale brewed from barley and flavored with herbs, earthy and hearty. The first platters to arrive hold bread made from coarse ground barley, dense but satisfying, and slabs of smoked fish, their edges glistening. Then come the more substantial dishes: roasted mutton, tender and spiced with wild herbs gathered in summer, pork with crackling skin, whole trout wrapped in leaves and cooked slowly over coals. There are bowls of stewed root vegetables, turnips, carrots, parsnips softened and sweetened from hours of cooking. Dried berries, preserved in honey, add a note of sharp sweetness to the meal. This is not merely a time for eating. The feast is a stage for politics, where alliances are forged and rivalries quietly tested. A guest's seat at the table, the number of toasts made in his honor, the quality of the gifts exchanged, these speak as loudly as words. When the plates are cleared, the scolder poet and storyteller rises. His voice carries the sagas of ancestors, the exploits of gods and heroes, and perhaps a tale crafted to honor the chieftain himself. The rhythm of his words blends with the soft crackle of the fire, the low murmur of conversation, and the occasional clink of a cup. Outside, the wind continues its ceaseless roaming, and snow begins to gather against the door. But inside, the hall is a world apart, warm, lit with the flicker of flame, and filled with the quiet power of shared bread, shared drink, and shared stories. As the feast winds down, and the last embers in the hearth turn to a soft red glow, the longhouse grows quieter. Guests drift into sleep where they sit, cloaks pulled close, the sound of their breathing mixing with the faint hiss of wind at the walls. In such moments, the Viking world feels both distant and familiar. Life then was shaped by forces beyond control, harsh winters, uncertain harvests, the ever-present possibility of conflict. Yet within those constraints, there was warmth, hospitality, and the steady rhythm of traditions that gave meaning to the passing years. Tonight, we have walked through that world together, from the frostbitten labor of a farmer's winter, to the voyages of Leif Erikson, to the silent resting place of the Oseberg ship, and finally into the firelit hall of a chieftain's feast. Each scene, though drawn from a past of over 1,000 years ago, still carries echoes that speak to us now. And as you settle into your own warmth, far from the winds of the North Atlantic, you may let the images fade gently. The longhouse door closes, the snow continues to fall, the voices drift into silence. Rest now. The past will still be there in the morning.